Salam Sejahtera and good morning. On behalf of the Mahathir Science Award Foundation and Academy of Sciences Malaysia, it is a pleasure to welcome all of you to this celebration of the International Day for the Conservation of the Mangrove Ecosystem. Thank you for joining us today. We have participation from the scientific community, academics, representatives of the ministry, public agencies, industries, and corporate friends. The Mahathir Science Award Foundation recognizes scientists, institutions, or organizations worldwide who have contributed impactful tropical research on the well-being of society. The Academy of Sciences Malaysia is an independent organization representing the scientific minds of Malaysia. We carry out strategic studies that are independent, evidence-based, reliable, and timely for the benefit of all. We are also proud to announce that ASM will be celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. Our webinar today, with the theme of People and Mangroves, aims to acknowledge the potential of Malaysia in leading mangroves research while supporting the livelihoods from mangroves. Without further ado, allow me to invite Academician Datuk Seri Dr. Mazlan Othman, Chair of Trop Science 2021, to deliver her welcoming remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Bashita. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the series of webinars on the future belongs to the tropics. I know that some of you are sitting on the other side of the planet from where I am. I do acknowledge the difficulties posed by differences in the time zones. So I really admire your commitment to this. Thank you. Allow me to give you some insight on our motivation. Countries in the tropics have gained significant success, but still face challenges to achieve their sustainable development goals. Malaysia is one of them. In the past decades, Malaysia led various research fields through several world-renowned institutions. She surely can, and she should, lead in these areas again and more. But how do we make tropical sciences sexy for the rest of the world? To achieve this aim, the Academy of Sciences Malaysia established the Mahathir Science Award that gives away $100,000 to scientists who make significant contributions to tropical sciences, as we heard from Vashita. Now, to support this prize, we are organizing the International Conference on Tropical Sciences, Contributions to Sustainability, or TropSci, in 2021. Many activities will be held to build awareness of the goals of TropSci 2021, to attract participation among policymakers, implementers both in the private and public sectors, and researchers. We invite you all to TropSci 2021, which is planned to be held 28th to 30th of June in 2021. Today we present to you a forum with the theme People and Mangroves to celebrate the International Day for the Conservation of the Mangrove Ecosystem. This discussion is important in the context of sustainable development in the tropics as a whole. Mangroves cover approximately 15 million hectares globally, and 95% of these grow in the tropics. Mangrove ecosystems contribute to the livelihood, is a food source, and in general plays a major role in the lives of coastal communities. For centuries, mangroves have helped these communities maintain their traditional cultures. However, we are losing mangroves 3 to 5 times faster than we are losing forests as a whole. Human population demands that are ever increasing towards space and resources of our planet are the root cause of this loss. Naturally, the ecological and socio-economic implications are serious. Surely, a continued commitment from all sectors is needed to enhance awareness and understanding of the significance of mangrove ecosystems. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope today's webinar will open our minds regarding the importance of mangroves, and Malaysia in particular will be able to ponder on what leadership roles she will be able to play in the future. Thank you for your participation and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Academician Datuk Seri Dr. Mazlan Othman. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now commence the webinar by inviting Dr. Ahmad Elri Amin to moderate on the upcoming sessions. Dr. Elri is a senior lecturer and a research fellow at the Institute for Environment and Development of University Kebangsaan Malaysia. He is the coordinator of the Malaysian Mangrove Research Alliance and Network and a commission member of the IUCN Mangrove Specialists. Without further ado, allow me to invite our moderator for today, Dr. Elri. Thank you.
So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I noticed from the organizer, some information from the organizer, that we have participation by fellow scientists. Yeah, we have participation by academics. We also have participation from members of the NGOs, community-based organizations, friends from corporate sectors, as well as students from around the globe. So on behalf of the organizers, good day to all of you, and thank you for joining us today. I first would also like to thank the Mahathir Science Award Foundation and the Academy of Sciences Malaysia for identifying and recognizing mangroves as the key feature, the signature habitat and the trademark ecosystem for the tropics. And hence, we have this celebration today in the lead up to the Tropical Science Conference, as mentioned by Professor Emerita Dr. Mazlan Osman just now, in June next year. So look out for the announcement for the conference. So ladies and gentlemen, mangroves are plants or group of plants that exhibit unique characteristics and an amazing evolutionary adaptation to form a luxurious forest on the coastlines and estuaries of the tropics and subtropic. Collectively, these plants form a very special and conducive environment as a habitat and ecosystem that supports outstanding biodiversity and provide multitude of ecosystem services, ranging from provisioning food, if you love fish and seafood, medicine, and raw materials, to regulating environmental processes like the hydrology cycle, carbon cycle, climate cycle, protecting coast, our coastline from erosion, as well as from oceanic and climatic hazards. Mangrove also on the coastlines mediate pollution and runoff in the rivers from the land, and of course the river needs to be treated before water being flushed out into the ocean. And not forgetting, another key environmental or ecosystem services provided by mangroves are the cultural services, the cultural values that they provide, like astounding aesthetic value that are being appreciated by artists and scientists from around the world, as well as for nature tourism, which will be discussed in the great length today. Mangrove also gives some sense of place that nurtures cultures around the tropics. So the importance of mangrove is increasingly being acknowledged by the global communities. And on the fateful day of November 6, 2015, UNESCO, during their 38th General Assembly, unanimously recognized the global importance of this ecosystem and proclaimed 26th of July of each year to be celebrated as the International Day for the Conservation of the Mangrove Ecosystems. And last Sunday, the governments around the world particularly in the tropics, including Malaysia. We celebrated the 5th International Day with renewed commitment to the protection and sustainable management of these ecosystems for the benefits of nature and humans of the current and future generations. So there are a lot of things still need to be learned and explored about mangroves. And as dynamics as the ecosystem itself, mangrove requires knowledge and input from multidisciplinary angles, perspectives, as well as expertise. So to learn more about the current state and the contemporary science in mangrove conservation, to understand the issues, conflicts and challenges in the conservation of mangroves, and to visualize the direct benefits and services that mangroves provide to our communities, we have a very interesting lineup of speakers to share their first-hand experiences and knowledge with all of us today. So, to set the scene, let's learn about the current state in the study of mangroves and mangrove conservation. And to do that, we have with us a very prolific young scientist and author by the name Associate Professor Dr. Daniel Frise. There he is, I can see him on the screen.
Hi.
Hello, Dan. So, if I can introduce you a little bit to the crowd, Daniel Frise. So basically, Dr. Daniel Frise is an associate professor at the Department of Geography, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences of National University Singapore. Dr. Dan Frise leads, is the head of the Mangrove Lab at NUS. And his current interest is to investigate biophysical and anthropogenic processes in coastal wetlands throughout Southeast Asia. He is very prolific, as I mentioned you earlier. He's one of the highest cited authors among our contemporary friends in mangrove science, with age index of 29 at the moment. I just checked, with a citation of about 3,180. That's pretty awesome, right? Right, so you can check out his team, the work of him and his team on their website at themangrovelab.com. Yeah, okay. So if it's okay with you, I would read the abstract provided by Dr. Dan. So the title of the presentation will be "The Science of Mangroves." Millions of people rely on the benefits provided by mangroves. However, mangroves have experienced rapid loss around the world. And this presentation will assess the broad state of the world's mangroves. As mangroves were one of the world's most threatened ecosystem in the 20th century, though deforestation has since reduced. However, hotspots of mangrove loss remain, particularly in Southeast Asia. So this is what we want to hear firsthand from Dr. Frise today. Sea level rise may also threaten many mangrove systems, though researchers are beginning to estimate their future resilience. And mangroves are now a global priority, and there is increasing conservation optimism, though we can't be complacent about the future of the world's mangrove forests. So without further ado, let's hear from Associate Professor Dr. Dan Frise. You have the screen now, Dan.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the great introduction, and thank you for this great opportunity to present. I really do appreciate it. And also thank you to everybody from, looks like names from all over the world. So it's really great. Thank you for everyone for taking the time. Can you see my slides okay? Excellent. Okay.
Oh, yes.
Okay, thanks. I'll make a start. So, yeah, thank you. Really happy to talk about the science of mangrove forests. Dr. Audrey, you already gave half of my presentation by giving an excellent introduction to the benefits of mangroves and the ecosystem services they provide. This is a painting on the wall at the Bali Mangrove Research Center. And I really like this painting because to me it shows what ecosystem services are all about. You see there are people fishing for food and recreation. There's biodiversity that you can see. There's education and recreation happening on the boardwalk. So there's a lot of visible ecosystem services that mangroves provide. What I like also about this picture is the invisible ecosystem services, the ones that you can't see, but the ones that are really important. to coastal communities and to the global community. And these would be things such as coastal protection and the carbon that is locked into the trees that you can see at the back. So, you know, I think, you know, we're all here because we recognize how important and just how great mangrove forests are and how much they contribute to coastal and global communities. But despite all of these benefits and the hard work of lots of people communicating how important mangroves are and quantifying how important they are, we still seem to be losing them, and, you know, which is, you know, something that we have to reconcile. And really the most basic science knowledge that we need for mangroves is kind of how much mangrove we have, how much we're losing, and where we're losing it, because, you know, that's the sort of information we need to make good conservation decisions, to make good policy recommendations, and to highlight where and how we should restore the mangroves that we have lost. So under the term science of mangrove forests, this is the science I'm going to talk about today, the science of mapping mangroves and knowing what the state of the world's mangroves are now and into the future. And we can look at that at a couple of different scales. Maybe first of all, I'll give you the global picture, and then I'll talk a little bit about Southeast Asia, and then I'll talk a little bit about Malaysia and some of the mangrove dynamics that we're seeing in Malaysia. So let's talk about the global scale first and give the global scale picture. So yeah, mangroves have really risen to the top of policy attention as being one of the world's most threatened ecosystems. And we see commentaries and discussions around what would a world without mangroves look like, because, you know, we were so concerned about their status and the rates of loss that they were experiencing. So, you know, maybe we would see a world without mangroves over the next 100 years. And this is a message that a lot of groups have used, you know, and it's, you know, it really does raise the challenge that we face, that, you know, we could have, you know, a very different coastal landscape by the end of the century if those kind of current rates of loss that we knew would carry on. And that would obviously have a big knock-on impact for those ecosystem functions and the benefits of mangroves that we have already introduced. So why did we think we might have a world without mangroves? Well, it came down to this a really kind of key report that came out in 2007 by the FAO. And it was this huge exercise to get together all of the knowledge that we had for different countries on how much mangrove they had. And from that, try to make some extrapolations on how much mangrove we might be losing. And this is a graph from that report. And it shows two things. It shows that Asia has the most mangrove in the world compared to other continents, but also that in Asia, we were losing mangrove faster than any other continent. So we were a real hotspot of mangrove loss at the global scale. But globally, you know, this and other reports kind of suggested that, you know, in the 20th century, this was based on information from, you know, the 1980s to the early 2000s. And during that time period, we kind of estimated that maybe we were losing mangroves about 1% to 3% per year, which does make them a highly threatened ecosystem. But of course, you know, maybe due to, you know, the information that was available, you know, we collated all of these different estimates, but there are some issues with that because they all have different methods and we're trying to compare different studies that had different objectives. And this actually caused a bit of a problem because depending on the type of data that you used, whether you used government reports, academic papers, or if you used remote sensing papers versus other papers that use different methods, you got different answers to how much mangrove we had. And then if we have uncertainty there, we then also have uncertainty in the rates of loss between those different estimates. So these are some examples of for different countries, depending on what type of data you used, you could get very different trends of mangrove loss or gain in some cases. So while we had a good kind of overall global picture, yeah, there was certainly a little bit of uncertainty in exactly how much mangrove we were losing and where. Now that all changed with the launch of this satellite. This is the Landsat satellite, and it allows global mapping of different ecosystem types. The first Landsat satellite was launched all the way back in 1972, but because of various issues around computing power and cloud cover and all sorts of things that make mangroves quite tricky to map, we didn't really get a good global remote sensing view until about 2011 was the first time we had a global mangrove map by Chandra Giri and colleagues in the US. So we knew kind of how much mangrove we had for the year 2000. But then we had to wait until 2016 to get the first global study of mangrove loss through time, using lots of different global maps of mangrove cover. And so, you know, a long gap between when this satellite was first launched in 1972 and 2016 when we got good numbers on the science of global mangrove loss. And this study showed that actually we were losing mangroves not at 1 to 3% per year, but at least from 2000 onwards, it was more about 0.2 to 0.6% per year. So a much greater reduction in the rates of mangrove loss than we thought previously. And subsequently, using different methods, other global studies have started to say that, yeah, global mangrove loss is, you know, between 0.1 and 0.3%, something like that, depending on the study. But again, much lower than 1 to 3% per year. Talking of the science of mangrove forests, this science just came out last week, and I really wanted to highlight it because I think it's a great study of not just showing how much mangrove we're losing, but what's causing it. And if we want to, again, do good conservation action, it's really helpful to know what's causing the mangrove loss. And this study was really interesting because it split out the human drivers of loss and the natural drivers of loss. Those natural drivers may still be exacerbated by humans, of course, but the processes are quite different. And it shows that some countries, the predominant cause of mangrove loss is on the natural side, and such as Australia and Brazil. But in Southeast Asia, we have a lot of human-driven mangrove loss. And we can zoom into the study a little bit more. And if we see for the Caribbean and Central America, this analysis suggested that a lot of the loss was due to extreme weather events and shoreline erosion. And this, you know, similar in Australasia. But again, if I zoom in here on Southeast Asia, you see the orange color, which is commodities. This is aquaculture and agriculture being the main drivers of mangrove loss in Southeast Asia. But, you know, it's really important to know on the global scale that actually it's very difficult for us to make generic conservation or policy recommendations because the cause of loss of mangroves is different depending on where you are in the world. Okay, so I highlighted Southeast Asia there. So let's zoom now into this region and again talk about how much mangrove we've been losing and what's been causing that loss. So the study shown in this slide here suggested that mangroves, again, from the start of the 21st century were being lost at 0.18% per year, which again is much lower than some of our previous assumptions. And again, in this map, you can show that mangrove deforestation is not equally distributed. There are some hotspots of mangrove loss in the region, and Myanmar in particular is one of those hotspots. And again, you know, much like we saw on the global scale, on the regional scale, we see different causes or proximate drivers of mangrove loss. So this study showed that aquaculture was still the main driver of mangrove loss in the region, which I think was always something we assumed. But other countries showed other causes of mangrove loss. And again, I'll highlight Myanmar. And Myanmar, a lot of mangrove loss there was, especially in the Arawadi Delta, was driven by rice production. So again, not all mangrove conservation will be applicable for all parts of Southeast Asia. We have to tailor things to look at the different causes of mangrove loss. Give you just some examples of that. This is a Google Earth shot of some aquaculture ponds that are being created on a mangrove area in Indonesia. And this is a study that looked at mangrove loss and the Arawadi Delta in Myanmar. And this shows that in 1978, which is the purple extent that you can see on the map, that was where mangroves were, but successively over time, there's been landward encroachment from the terrestrial zone into mangroves. And so in 2011, the only mangrove area that was left was the green areas that you can see in this map. And this was driven primarily by the landward encroachment of rice paddy production. And this study also shows that when there were changes in food security and rice policies in Myanmar, you saw a knock-on impact on the rate of deforestation of mangroves in the Arawadi Delta. Okay, so that was a whistle-stop tour of the global and Southeast Asian situation. But since this seminar is being hosted in Malaysia, I thought I would end with a couple of slides on the science and the remote sensing of mangrove dynamics in Malaysia. So in Malaysia, we have a pretty good idea of mangrove extent and where it is because of this study by Hamdan Omar and colleagues at FRIM in Malaysia. And this is a great map of where mangroves are distributed. And you can see that this study showed that 60% of Malaysian mangroves are found in Sabah, 22% in Sarawak, and 18% in Peninsular Malaysia, particularly on the west coast, where we have more estuaries and sediment deposition for mangrove and calmer wave conditions for mangroves to grow. But what are the dynamics? We know how much mangrove there is in Malaysia, or we have a good idea, but what are the dynamics of mangroves? Well, if I take the FAO data that we talked about at the beginning of this presentation, for Malaysia, the FAO suggested that between 1980 and 2005, the average rate of mangrove loss in Malaysia was 0.8% per year, which is still lower than the global 1 to 3% per year that we thought about in the 20th century, but it's still quite high. Now, with the advent of those satellite remote sensing studies that I've introduced to you, the picture now from the 21st century is quite different. And all of the lines are at different heights on this graph because different methods give different estimates of the exact mangrove area. So there is some uncertainty and variation in how much mangrove between these different studies. But what to me is the most important thing is that all of the recent studies based on remote sensing show very similar trends in mangrove loss, between 0.1 to 0.3% per year. So the slope and of those lines is very consistent between the studies, even if the amount of mangrove differs. So that means that we have 5 different studies, all using different methods, different data sources, but they all come up with a similar thing, that in Malaysia we're losing mangroves between 0.1 to 0.3% per year. They're all consistent with each other, so I think we can trust those numbers, because they're all pointing in the same direction. So, this is great news, right? Some of this difference in the rates might be due to different methods, the remote sensing versus this literature-based method. So some of it's methodological, but some of it I really do think highlights conservation and policy success and restoration efforts in Malaysia, but also the same trend you can see regionally and globally. So, I think we have seen a slowdown in mangrove loss, and I think that hopefully mangroves are now no longer the most threatened ecosystem in the world. That doesn't mean to say that we've can pack up and we've done a great job and now we can move on. There's still a lot of challenges left to ensure that, first of all, those rates of mangrove loss remain as low as possible, and that we try and get them even lower. And in fact, we get them beyond a reduction in mangrove loss, but we actually start to increase mangrove area at the national, regional, and global scale. And there are some ways we can do this. And again, science is helping us to get an idea of this. So this is one example of a science application trying to understand how much area is suitable for restoration, how much mangrove that was previously lost is suitable to be restored back and increase mangrove area. This was a global study led by the Nature Conservancy, the University of Cambridge, and a number of other partners in universities and NGOs across the world. We all came together to come up with a science and evidence-based model of restoration potential, which are areas that might be more amenable to large-scale restoration than others. And based on biophysical, so physical and ecological characteristics, there might be as much as 800,000 hectares of mangrove area that's physically suitable for restoration. Of course, realizing that figure might be a challenge because there are lots of really strong social and economic constraints to restoration. Things around the opportunity cost of aquaculture, around issues of land tenure and who owns the land and who has permission to do mangrove restoration. So there's a huge number of socioeconomic constraints. So maybe just because 800,000 hectares is physically suitable doesn't mean we can achieve all of that. But at least we have an idea of the scale of restoration that might be feasible if restoration techniques allow us to do so. And from this same study, and all of this study is available on this web link that we have on the page, where you can zoom into particular countries or regions. But there is a sizable amount that's biophysically suitable for restoration, even in Malaysia, around 17,000 hectares or so. So there is scope to do restoration at a large scale. However, at the moment, maybe the science of restoration needs, we need to improve to get us to those kind of numbers. But I'll just kind of wrap up by saying that, I hope all of this information around the reduction in deforestation rates nationally, regionally, and globally, and the potential for some large-scale restoration, I hope gives you a bit of optimism that maybe, the hard work that all of you have been putting in for decades and decades, whether you're working for a government agency, an NGO, academia, or a local community, the actions that we've been doing and the actions that are all being celebrated during the International Day for Conservation of the Mangrove Ecosystem, I think we can be optimistic they're working, and all of our efforts haven't been in vain. And this goes into a more broad kind of philosophy of conservation optimism, which is now being discussed in a lot of different ecosystems around, if we want people to get behind conservation and we want them to be on board and to contribute, we have to give more than the doom and gloom scenario. We have to give people a reason to hope and a reason to want to contribute, to make even more conservation gains. So this is really what conservation optimism is about. And I think mangroves, because of some of the successes we've seen, I think are a really good case study for conservation optimism. And I highlight an article here that discusses this, and I highlight it because it has some, as well as some of the, I noticed some of the names joining us for this webinar are also part of this initiative, but also some really great Malaysian scientists were also part of this discussion about how mangroves are a great example for conservation optimism. Of course, it's cautious optimism. We haven't solved the problem, and we're at a tipping point. If we get too optimistic, and if we get too relaxed about the situation, then actually we can flip back to where we used to be. So we're at a tipping point, and it's really now that we have to decide, how do we secure the conservation gains we've already made, and how do we improve them in the future? Because the future, doesn't necessarily look optimistic for mangroves. We have different drivers of mangrove deforestation coming in that may affect mangroves. We have issues of climate change, and particularly sea level rise, that we expect to affect a large proportion of the world's mangroves in the future. So the job is not done, but I think we have reason to be cautiously optimistic, and to give us and other stakeholders motivation to do even more in the future. So to summarize, we need basic science in mangroves, and the most basic science we need, I think, is how much mangrove we have, where it's being lost, and what's causing that loss. And I think we're now at a position where we can say that we have pretty good science on those questions. And it's continuously improving, and we're getting more and more studies which are showing similar trends. So I think we can be really confident in the science that we're seeing now at the global, regional, and national scale. And this science shows that all the hard work we're doing is paying off, but we still have a really long way to go. And I hope that inspires you and your colleagues and other stakeholders to carry on doing the great work we've all been doing. And hopefully, when if I get the chance to give this seminar in 10 or 20 years' time, I hope I can show another graph which is showing an even smaller rate of mangrove loss than we've seen right now. So keep up the good work, everyone. And thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Awesome presentation. One thing I would like to highlight, that the way that you end the presentation with that optimism, which actually give hope for all of us, especially for communities that have been working hard to protect and to conserve and to rehabilitate most of the time their surrounding mangroves, right? And then of course, to all of us scientists, we need to protect, we need to have mangroves to continue working on mangroves, right? So, one quick question. I have an issue with the data that you highlighted of the variety and the difference or discrepancies in data presented by scientists from throughout the world with different methods. Do you have any, quick suggestion on how can we consolidate these and perhaps get everyone together to work on an agreed number for mangrove cover and mangrove loss?
Yeah, I used to worry about this a lot as well, that we see lots of different studies and they're all coming up with these different numbers. And I spend a lot of time thinking about it and worrying about what that means for conservation. How can a government official use the information if there's lots of different estimates, right? I don't worry about it so much anymore, because different methods will always give us different answers. And I think if we try to get, for example, if we want to know the one number of global mangrove area, I don't think we will ever get it, actually. I think it's impossible to get, because there's lots of different definitions of what a mangrove is, which we still haven't always decided, and different methods only allow us to map different things. So I think maybe it's impossible to get the one single number. And so because I think it's impossible, I stopped worrying about it. But I think what's more important is that there are consistency between numbers. So as long as the numbers are transparent, as long as anybody could repeat it, the methods are clear, the assumptions are clear, and as long as it's repeatable by other researchers, and as long as they all come to the similar conclusion. And so in this case, they're all coming to the same conclusion that mangrove loss is 0.1 to 0.3% per year, for example. As long as all of these different methods come up with, consolidate around those kind of things, then I think actually that gives us even more confidence, because we're looking at it from lots of different directions, and they're still coming up with similar, consistent numbers, even if the exact numbers are different.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dan. Actually, we received quite a few questions, a lot of questions from the message from the organizers. So for the first one, can I, yeah.
This is the first question.
Okay, this one. All right, so there's one question, I don't get the name, but hi Dan, if you do interact with much with government agencies, do you feel that they appreciate the importance of mangroves and that it's beneficial for nation development to protect and use mangroves sustainably? This is a question from, can you identify the question?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I work with a lot of different government agencies in different countries, primarily in the ASEAN region. And and government agencies, obviously, that are involved in mangroves, such as forestry departments and fisheries and marine affairs departments, etc., but also other agencies such as land development agencies. And in all of those conversations, I've never once had a conversation where somebody didn't appreciate mangroves. So I think, at least in my interactions, I feel very lucky that I've always been interacting with government agencies that have appreciated the importance of mangroves, even if that's not part of their remit. So I think there is a general acknowledgement that mangroves are important. Of course, different agencies have different priorities, and how you integrate those is a different question, right? But I think I'm confident that, at least the agencies that I interact with, they're starting from a position of understanding why mangroves are important and want to do something with them within their own constraints. And I think a lot of things have helped get that appreciation of mangroves across different government agencies, and in particular things like the Paris Agreement and the importance of mangroves for carbon has put mangroves on the agenda of a lot of agencies beyond just agencies that are interested in forest resources or biodiversity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So that was actually from Mr. Yao Hua Law. Thank you very much for the question. The next one would be, what kind of efforts could be done to push for mangrove area restoration and promote conservation optimism? I know you highlighted a little bit, but maybe this one scales down to local communities or maybe by government agencies, if you can.
Yeah. So what can we do to increase conservation optimism in mangroves even more and restore them? I mean, there's not one answer to that, and we need to do a range of different things all at once, and a range of different stakeholders need to do them all at once. Okay. I think first of all, we really need to keep pushing the importance of mangroves, and not just to government agencies, but to the public. And I know, Dr. Audrey, you've been doing a great job of this in the newspapers about talking about mangroves. I think you almost have a regular column now about mangroves in the New Straits Times, right? Which is great, because that's one way to access the public. And I think if we have public support, then that filters down into a lot of different things. So I think we have to keep proving the importance and why conservation of mangroves is important compared to all the other land use options that we have. So that's one thing. I think we need to keep thinking about the policy context and make the policy context amenable to mangroves. And so, that we're not just doing little bits and pieces of restoration or conservation here or there, but that we have coordinated efforts at national and regional and global scales, so that the governance arrangements facilitate a lot of on-the-ground action. That's really important. And then, of course, the last step is restoration. And I think there we really have to think about what type of restoration techniques work and which ones don't. And I think we have a good idea of that now. We know that you have to work with the physical environment, because mangroves are very sensitive and they don't just grow wherever we plant them. And that we need to plant them in the right place where the conditions are right for them to survive, so we don't waste our precious resources and money and time and effort on restorations that are going to fail, but we put them in the right place, we do our homework, and we make them as successful as they can be. Then I think we can start to secure that our optimism.
Thank you very much. You actually answered the next question. I just highlighted a question from Datuk Rahim Nick. Thank you very much, Datuk, for the question. He was asking about, restoration of mangroves are a challenging thing to do, and what are the most practical methods and sustainable species to use. On opportunity cost to aquaculture, can you give some comments? So there's an additional question, not just about restoration that you've just answered. So the dilemma in between pushing for aquaculture development and mangrove restoration. Can you describe a little bit further on that, Dan?
Yeah, and this is one of the key constraints when we are looking at where restoration might be feasible. Some places are not physically feasible, but some places are not economically feasible, right? And of course, in the coastal zone, we have a lot of competing land uses, and we have livelihoods and communities to think of, and of course, mangroves contribute to that, but so do other economic activities, right? So I think we have to look at places where the opportunity cost of aquaculture or any other land use is lower, or that the economic and non-economic values of mangroves may outweigh them. And some people have talked about carbon credits, for example, as a way of making mangroves more economically attractive and competing against these kind of opportunity costs. There are many issues and challenges around that as well, and we do have carbon credit projects, but we're still kind of in the pilot phase of many of them, and I think a lot of stakeholders are learning from those experiences. But opportunity costs really are the main challenge. But I think as long as we know that we have to take opportunity costs and other socioeconomic constraints into account, we can use those in methodologies that allow us to kind of look at a landscape and see where mangrove restoration might be most feasible. And then we put our efforts and our time and effort and expense into those areas.
Thank you very much, Dan. Quite honestly, we have like about 15 to 20 questions for you, but we only have 1.5 minutes left to go. But I promise to all participants who have posed their questions, can we collect and collate all these questions, and I will deliver it to Dr. Dan Frise, and please provide your email address so we can send his response to all of you, if you don't mind. But to end, now that Dan, you did mention about payments for ecosystem services. I think this is the bridging from mangrove science into policy. And could you provide some recommendation or suggestion on the best way to go as a means for conserving mangroves, as particularly in Southeast Asia and throughout the tropics?
Yeah, I think there is a huge scope for payments for ecosystem services, particularly in Southeast Asia, because we do have if we're talking about carbon credits in particular, which most people focus on, we have some of the most carbon-rich mangroves in the world. They're based right here. So we have the scope for it physically. The challenge is the governance and the socioeconomics again. Vietnam has a great payment for forest environment services law, and it's a national law, and mangroves, I understand, are now included within that law in one of the more recent iterations. So Vietnam, for example, is really focused on making a conducive governance environment to allow PES to work. So that gives one example of how other countries might be able to facilitate payments for ecosystem services. Of course, there are some real challenges with it, and which is why we don't see many at the moment, and many schemes or examples at the moment. And maybe just to end on a few thoughts, let's think about how we can do payments for ecosystem services beyond carbon. There are many more benefits to mangroves than just carbon, and some of them may be suitable for payments, some may not. And also to think about where the benefits of PES goes. Do they go to the landowner, or do they go to the communities who are managing those lands? The equity and the benefit sharing of PES is something that has proved a big challenge in terrestrial projects around the world. So I think those are the two things. So I think there's a lot of scope for payments for ecosystem services, but we have to do it in the right, equitable way. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope to read about that details soon in your next publication. All right, so with that, I think, yeah, we had a great insights from Dan, and then we've heard some good suggestions, and we received a lot of questions, really some technical questions too. So we will collect all this information and pass it on to Dr. Dan, and we will respond to all of you through emails or through our connections from the Secretariat. So we would like to thank Dr. Daniel Frise for his time, and for his effort in participating with us, celebrating with all of us today, the International Day for the Conservation of Mangrove Ecosystem. All right, so okay, so let's move on to the next session. Yeah? So juxtaposed in between land and sea, there are tremendous challenges faced by this habitat, the mangroves and their adjacent habitats, both from natural and anthropogenic disturbances. And living on the edge of the terrestrial and marine biome sometimes leads mangrove to fall in between cracks in the governance for protection of these resources. So to talk about this aspect, we have a very experienced, I would say, conservationists, managers of mangroves and wetlands in Malaysia. And by the name of Dr. Rahimat Shah Ahmad, he is currently the founder and currently the Chief Executive Officer of Sabah Environmental Trust. So can we invite Dr. Rahimat Shah on the screen now? Hello, Assalamualaikum, Dr. Rahim, how are you?
Waalaikumsalam to all, to you, Audrey, and all the panelists and members who are listening to this talk.
Thank you very much for your time, for being with us today. Yeah, so your background actually matched Dan's background just now. I forgot to ask him where that was, but where was that taken, the picture behind you?
This is Southern Kalimantan, happens to be the first FMU mangrove area that was certified FSC.
Okay, interesting. Right, so a little bit about you, if you don't mind, 1 to 2 minutes to describe Dr. Rahimat Shah. He obtained his doctorate in Protected Area Planning and Resource Management from University Technology Malaysia in Johor in 2003. And as I mentioned, he is currently the CEO of Sabah Environmental Trust, a charitable trust registered in Sabah. And he is a fellow of Academy of Sciences Malaysia and Malaysian Scientific Association. He is the Deputy President of Sabah Wetlands Conservation Society and member of Sabah Biodiversity Council. At international level, he is the Regional Coordinator for Transboundary Conservation Specialist Group of IUCN WCPA and member of the Advisory Board for Global UK Challenges Research Fund on Blue Communities Project in Southeast Asia. There you go, very important key person. So if you are applying for GCR fund, this is a person to get advice from. So Dr. Rahim, as he fondly known, will be presenting or will be talking to us about the conservation of mangroves for community livelihoods, particularly in the Malaysian case. So I reckon for our friends from outside Malaysia, may be able to learn some of our experience that will be shared by Dr. Rahim. A little bit of background of the presentation. So this presentation will discuss on mangroves in Malaysia and how it benefited the coastal communities all these years, from providing resources to feed the population to that of creating economic activities. Nevertheless, the expansion of agricultural crops and aquaculture have reduced the size of these mangrove forests and threatened the ecosystems, thus affecting its functions and the livelihoods of these coastal communities. So the protection of existing mangrove forests is crucial in order to create activities that will contribute to socio-economic well-being of the populations and the nation. I reckon this is a good continuity from what Dr. Dan Frise has presented just now. So without further ado, Dr. Rahim, 20 minutes for your presentation. The shorter presentation, the more question and answer session we will have. So you have the screen. Thank you, Dr. Rahim.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much once again, Dr. Audrey. It was interesting to note the presentations by Dr. Frise earlier, indicating that the rate of loss has been reduced somehow, but that should not keep us complacent, because what is left behind these days is so small that even at a very negligible rate of loss, it will still be substantial. Now, my presentation talks about the conservation of mangrove for community. I wouldn't want to say that it is not serious, as indicated in many papers or articles, but somehow the recent pandemic thing have made us alert more on food security. And this has led to a lot of community on the coastal area basically dependent upon mangrove ecosystem for survival, because they were among the last people to would have get benefit from the government during the pandemic. Because during the pandemic, the first thing was that the urban people, the city people would get immediate attentions compared to them. And that was a very serious thing to me. So this was how we have seen long ago when we were kids, a mangrove look like. And then subsequently, some gentlemen and policymakers decided to reap some benefit of the mangrove ecosystem for beneficial purpose in terms of revenue. Ecotourism, recreational tourism, and many other things were introduced. Along the way with this, they bring along some damages that eventually would have destroyed our mangrove ecosystem. And this vicious cycle has been going on and on for decades. So that was the picture that I want to show it to you about things happening. As mentioned earlier, in Malaysia, mangrove 60% are found in Sabah, 23% or 22% in Sarawak, 17 or 18 in Peninsula, depending on what year data you use. This was a 2016 data. Now, here on the mangrove area, if you look at the blue are the land area of Peninsula, the tree region, and what you see here on the mangrove, a very small percentage, Sarawak and Sabah. So compared to the land area, very small, which is something about, for Sabah, even the biggest one, it's only about 4.5% of the land area is actually mangrove. And in Sarawak, about 0.7, and Peninsula is even smaller. So, but then when you look at what are the status of this mangrove, based on 2016 data, it indicates clearly that a large portions of this area in Sabah and Peninsula falls under protected category, either as a forest reserve or parks or whatever name you may call it, while Sarawak remain to be seen as state land. So a huge percentage unprotected. These are questions that we will get back later on and ask, what do we do with this unprotected land? This is another data, introduce an old data where the locations of the mangrove are located. I will just move fast on this. Now, we all know from sciences that mangrove, especially in the Southeast Asian region or the Coral Triangle area, are super rich. And this is very crucial for us to know that if there is a single hectare that we could save and prolong it from destructions, we should try our very best. More important also that most of this area that we are in Malaysia we've been talking about, are basically part of the flyway for the migratory bird. Area of my interest. More and more of these places are being destroyed, the habitats for this migratory bird, and subsequently it affects the species. The benefits and functions is very simple. I won't go into details of this. We all know that mangrove is very crucial as a spawning area for fisheries, prawns, and many other things. Most important, as earlier, is the flyway. It protects the coastline, absorb pollutions, and then there are also, like in Sabah, the collections of mangrove for tannins. The bark of a mangrove tree use tannin, and this has been used for multiple years, but I have not seen much of it being used as a natural dye in Malaysia. In Indonesia, it's used as a natural dye. Here, the collections in Sabah has been more for drinks, an ingredient important in Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola. But the majority of the use and benefits these days come from it as a resources for tourism or recreational use. Government are spending money to develop mangrove area because they would get quick return from visitors through entrance fees, things like that. But of course, more important, has been used for educations, school program and stuff like that. Some of the well-known mangrove sites in Malaysia that we all talk about, basically they are small pocket area. You can't even call them a landscape or ecosystem because it's just a little bit here, a little bit there. I think this is good, but we should start looking into the bigger picture, moving into a level where you protect the mangrove landscape or ecosystem. And some of the activities that we get to see, from recreational thing into livelihood for communities, into things that are very famous, charcoal, that are found in Matang and several other areas in Sarawak or Sabah. But I think there has been a lot of reductions of use of mangrove as a charcoal, other than sometimes used to be for piling in building homes, things like that. Now, another data talking about the value of mangrove. I am particularly interested in the direct use, especially on charcoal as a pole, but fish and prawns. Tourism seems to be the highest contributions in terms of value. I think it's the easiest, but of course, in terms of tourism, there can be a lot of costs to it. Putting up infrastructures, clearing areas, sometimes building roads would break up mangrove area, become fragmented, stuff like that. The indirect use are all there, but as I said, this indirect use in terms of carbon, as mentioned earlier by Daniel, is that the government is talking about things that you can only talk on paper. What are the value to convince me? What you can convince the government is basically put the money on the table and have an open check for them to use. Then they will sit down and listen to you. If it's just paper after paper on values, I think even somebody on the street can tell you the value of that, but it cannot convince the politicians or decision makers. You must be able to put money on the table and let them decide what to do with it. Now, among the biggest things is that we all remember tsunami in 2004, the amount of destructions that it caused. This affected almost a large part of the coastal community who are within the lower income margin and affect their livelihood for years. Destroy properties and everything, the resources that they go out every day to look for their food. So, we found out that in an IUCN publications in 2005 indicates that if it had not been for the mangrove forests, the damage caused would have been much more higher than what we have seen during that time. It was bad, but those with mangrove forests intact actually survive much more better than those without. So that alone, in planning and land use purposes, is crucial to protect whatever we have left for the purpose of coastline protections and life eventually. Issues in terms of mangrove ecosystem loss that lead to the loss of mangrove biodiversity is very simple. Number one is that because of the demand for tourism, everything, you start building constructions for harbor, port, that will serve as services for the community people, bringing goods from outside. And this somehow remove the mangrove, and that leads to degradations of the habitat. The second one is that population growth, everything, or tourism, settlement, building a new settlement. Sometimes it can start with illegal settlement, and then a resort coming in, utilizing mangrove areas. So the habitat is replaced. The other one, of course, to feed the people, to feed the tourists, everything, you need opening for aquaculture and coastal agriculture. So that again clear up certain habitat. These are all things that we have seen over and over, and the cycle keeps on repeating. The other one is that something like every little citizen could have played a role to reduce this dumping of garbage. Most of this garbage comes from food waste, plastic bags, stuff like that. And we have seen too many of this. In addition, authority will say, let's have a cleanup project. Every now and then, cleanup project. And you get free t-shirts or a cap, everything. It becomes a KPI, a key performance indicator in some agency of how many cleanup projects or gotong royong, they call it, they do have. But actually, is that the right thing? Shouldn't we talk about no littering in the first thing, so that we don't end up collecting garbage? Now, in brief, the two things in terms of population growth over the years and the international arrival of tourists to Malaysia, these two things has been always measured very well by the government. That leads to populations, settlement, resort, infrastructures move, recreational, food needed, and again, supporting what Dr. Daniel Frise mentioned earlier, land clearing, something like about 62% of changes due to land use change. But I think the other important thing is enforcement. Lack of enforcement has been one of the things. Sometimes enforcement is more of a knee-jerk. Somebody complain, put in the media, then you get people addressing it. Otherwise, if somebody open a mangrove area quietly and build illegal homes, nobody say anything. And 5-10 years down the line, especially in part of Borneo, we start to claim customary right to the land. And when you do that under customary rights of native, it's not easy to address or evict these people. Again, you get to see mangrove being cleared rapidly, houses like this coming up in the middle of a mangrove forest. But worst case even is that, although it's illegal, it would have connected water supply sometimes, or electrical supply with meter. Now, how on earth would illegal houses in the middle of a mangrove forest get electrical supply with meter? That's something that I still can't answer, whether those are illegal or somehow somebody keeping a blind eye. So, mangrove cleared. Again, the other thing is that we have heard big stories about how a protected area quietly have changed hands to become private land, stuff like that. These are happening. Not only they are protected, they are listed as Ramsar site, and yet things can happen. There was a big hoo-ha about it. And then, of course, under threat, most Ramsar sites are under threat because poverty alleviations are addressing again, but sometimes government also partly we blame for not looking into it. So, I would push a few things. In general, I would say, on the ground, if there is a need to do replanting, let's go and map it out, all those degraded areas or abandoned ponds, so that it will bring back biodiversity. Don't make an excuse of clearing those degraded areas for some other kind of project. Keep it. Enforcement is crucial. We must continue to enforce the law on land clearing in protected area or forested mangrove area belonging to the state. No more conversions. In terms of planning, development versus conservation needs, there are the needs to address our commitment under SDG and IG target, and also national policies. There is no point subscribing to these people, become a signatory, everything, sending a whole bunch of our nationals to go to all over the world for this meeting, and back home, actually, we are doing the other way around, except on paper, it looks very good. Respect the policy, go and do it. Excuse me. On land use planning, there are a lot of maps, document structural, local plans, special area plans. That has been approved, but sometimes neglected. EIA and social impact assessment have to be conducted to all this area. Excuse me. In terms of management, we've been hearing a lot about management of mangrove, sustainable, everything, being the oldest, but have yet to see any of this being certified, either by the national standard or international standard. Let's not talk about sustainability of our mangrove if we can't even go for certifications. Now, the most important thing again, excuse me, for mangrove forests on state land, we have a small percentage of that. What do we do with it? Do we take it all out and place it for development? Or should we basically put forward to protect it under forest reserve or national or state parks, whatever it is, so that whatever remnant that we have, we can keep it? And then listing of Ramsar site. We are progressing, more areas are being proposed, everything, but somehow all this Ramsar site has been like little thing managed by certain agencies or certain group of people. We should look at landscape and ecosystem level for Ramsar site. Go big. It is about wise use of wetland, not just limited to protected area. These are two examples in the region, in Hong Kong, and then in South Korea, Suncheon. They're talking about the whole thing, from the catchment down until the coast. Communities, rice field, everything, not just protected area. Go big. I think this is the best thing to do, so that multiple stakeholders are involved, agencies, and responsibility. In terms of data, we have heard earlier, but thanks, the last 4 publications indicates that the data has been consistent in terms of mangrove loss. But sometimes it's good to see actual, in terms of values, data. The forest cover versus the protected area, the balance, there seems to be inconsistent over the years. Example, I've been trying to collect from different publications. Some are missing, some's going up, some going down. You have the agency, and this inconsistency is somehow not very good. An extract from a publication said, bad data equal bad policy. How to trust estimate of ecosystem loss when there is so much uncertainty. In terms of value of mangrove, actual versus valuation, again, I said, on paper, it looks good. But as far as the government is concerned, put the money on the table so that they can really commit themselves to it. With that, thank you very much to all. And I will pick up questions that you have.
Thank you again, Dr. Rahmat Shah, for the insights on protection and conservation of mangroves for the benefits of the country, of the community. Yeah? Right. So you've highlighted, you did mention about a couple of policies that we have here in Malaysia, and we all know that we have policy on biological diversity, we have policy on climate change. Actually, we have numerous a long list of legal instruments and tools to actually protect our mangrove in particular, or biodiversity in general. But do you think it is enough, or do you think they are effective? Provided that the point that you've highlighted about enforcement, so do we have enough legal tool to protect and to conserve?
I think it is not an easy question for me or anyone to answer. It takes a champion to make things happen. If the government is committed, or someone who is can be identified as a champion committed to ensure that the policies are implemented or the law are enforced, then we might have a good chance. There is no point putting in 5 or 10 more policy papers or things like that if people are not serious about it. You look at offenses under most of the instrument of law, example, increasing the penalty. For a department, I would say put one. The clearing of forest reserve illegally harvesting can cost you up to 500,000 ringgit. Now, if you're found guilty, you might have to pay for that. But then for an agency, we have to work it out. Number one is that if they work hard and proven guilty, the guy is penalized and pay the fine, or basically go to jail or pay 500,000. The money goes into the federal coffer. It doesn't go to the agency for the hard work. The agency might get standard average contributions from the government, the same thing every year and year. So they have no obligations to continue enforcing. So I think, again, is there a possibility somehow that the penalty, if it's, let's say, a fine of 100,000, that 80% of the money goes to the agency that enforce that law, so that they become more motivated now to go out and catch more people, because that is basically a commission. So it's never an easy answer, but it needs a good leadership to ensure that what we have, I think, is more than adequate. Just go out and do it, do your job, and either enforce it or follow the policy.
Thank you very much for the stern advice. So you did mention also about tourism. I'm very interested on this topic because we all know that tourism, especially in particular nature tourism, mangrove tourism, the one of the highest or major income for the country and also for the state, I reckon. So should we have some kind of laws or policy to control or to perhaps apply sustainable tourism to avoid mass tourism that has been implicated many conservation areas throughout the world?
Yeah, I think in IUCN we continue to promote sustainable tourism. Of course, other people down here might call edu-tourism, agro-tourism, whatever tourism you call it. But in IUCN, UNEP, and also United Nations World Travel Organizations, we continue to pursue the word sustainable tourism. That means the communities benefit, the people, the businessman benefits in terms of income, but the government also benefits in terms of tax, but eventually the environment as a supplier benefit the most. So we don't need law. All we need is good practices. Remember, in mangrove area, when they are under the forest management as a forest reserve or under park, number one, they should have a proper management plan. The management plan would guide what kind of development are permissible. Visitors number managed by in terms of the facilities they have, like say how many rest house, chalet, or hostel they have. That would provide the indications of number of people. But some area can also be what we call hardened by building boardwalk or things like that. They can accommodate larger number of people so that it provides the benefit. But this has to do with proper planning, because some area, as I said, if you have 100% of an area that are under mangrove, you might only be totally developing 1%, while the 99% continue to remain as natural as possible. Unfortunately, sometimes that 1% happens to be highlighted the most, projected with mass tourism, everything, and people might get the impression that, oh, you're promoting mass tourism. Remember, it's only 1%, 99 are still untouched. But then it has to be balanced. So planning is important, zoning is important to accommodate visitors. But I think it is important because not only it provides income to the resource manager, it do provide employment, jobs, and many other things for the communities of that area too. The trickle benefit goes down a long way for communities, and I think economy are better.
Good point. See, we always, discussing, and we face, especially when we go down, especially for you, when you work with the community, you face the community, discuss with the community, and we always hear their plight on getting a little bit of portion from tourism development for conserving areas surrounding them, right? So a couple of questions we actually receive, and it all lingers around protection of mangrove and how they are effective in providing income and resources to benefits to the communities, like direct benefits. So one of the question that we have, maybe perhaps the last one for the session, so from Luis Eduardo Gomez, how can we improve citizen science collaboration to data collection and their participation in policy discussion? So I reckon communities have roles to play. Of course, they are the agent, they are the pretty much dwellers or the people living in the mangroves or surrounding the mangrove, but they can also contribute to the better management of the mangrove itself, collaborating with the government. That they can also work together with scientists that can also contribute to the better management of resources. So maybe if you want to summarize your presentation by explaining more about the contribution from local communities.
I think the role of the communities in providing information about the resources found in the mangrove ecosystem has been tremendous, from traditional knowledge into some other economic benefits, into bringing people to the area to use. That basically, there is no denial about that contributions. The only thing is that how they were recorded, and that sometimes is unfortunately that the author who spent 3 days in the field happens to write a 10-page report highlighting he's the author without the thing. Now, we understand that in moving citizen science, there is also to be remembered among researchers about FPIC, free prior informed consent, discussions with all this community before you can even publish any of this knowledge and informations. That somehow has been recorded because in the end of the day, very crucial, we all required under the CBD to recognize FPIC. Secondly, the data that were accessed by the communities in this area, which basically for them, looking at the place as a spawning area for them to harvest food, all those things. And if it's protected again, of course, with approval from the authority, has never been a problem. Now, when they start to play the role of citizen science, my concern is that access to biodiversity in accordance to the law of a country or a state sometimes were neglected. In the case of like the region of Sabah and Sarawak, they have law where permissions and approval have to be obtained to access biodiversity. That means you can go to a forest reserve or anything, or even state land. If you want to access it, you must get approval. Now, using communities to do this for the purpose of scientists to do publications can be a breach of the law. and this will have implications sometimes. So be very careful on that, I would suggest, but it is very important to work together. So we are looking into such a mechanism of accessing bio-de-inf on the citizen science with the legal part, but we do hope it can be resolved soon once there are consultation among stakeholders, because we are seeing more of this trend, citizen science, which is very interesting. I think it gives them some sort, empower them to understand deeper the important. And imagine young folks in the village talking about, in a rather crude scientific ways, explaining about the values of the mangrove ecosystem. That would be basically something like a wonderful thing. But we stop at that. The opportunities is there. The only thing is that for scientists, when you collect information, my kind reminder is, please make sure that you observe the law of the place. There are instruments of law that can be enforced upon you, and you could get your permit cancelled or kicked out of the state by immigrations. But please, if there is any way, I think I'll be more than happy to talk about that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rahim. Yeah, that's very good point also to all scientific communities. There are ethical obligation that we have, and of course our commitment, our rapport with the communities, and of course they have entertained generations of researchers that has been studying mangroves around their area or on the nature surrounding around them. So they would expect a good input or a good response from scientific communities. So there you go, one responsibility for the scientific communities. And the same situation with Dan, we received quite late last minute questions, like another 7 or 8 or 9 new questions. So Dr. Rahim, I know you're very responsive, so maybe we can collate and deliver these messages and questions to you. Yes. Or if you have time, maybe you can respond to the questions online, or maybe we can do it later. But thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Rahim Shah, for
Thank you. Have a nice day for the invitations.
Thank you. On behalf of the organizers, thank you for your time and effort for being with us, and happy International Day for the Conservation of Mangrove Ecosystems to you and our friends in Sabah Wetlands Conservation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very Environmental much. Trust. Thank you very much. So there you go. Management of mangrove resources actually goes down to the landowner. I think the key important message that we've received from Dr. Rahim Shah and also Dr. Dan Frise earlier is that the management of resources require good network or good collaboration in between communities, scientists, as well as the local authorities and at the local, state and federal level. So as the landowner, of course, it is the responsibility of the local authority or the government to impose or to enforce protection. But then we need to also consider the generational usage of resources by local communities. So by totally protecting and not allowing communities to use may not be the right way to do it also. But then to expose this area or not to protect mangrove and to allow physical development would be not right also. So there's a conflict in between or the dilemma that we have, but the way to go is to collaborate in between networks of stakeholders. So thank you very much. So that's the end of the second session. And so we've heard, we've already understand about the issues and the basic needs or basic understanding of mangroves and mangrove ecosystem. And we know also now the importance of mangroves, the benefits that they provide for the communities and for the country, and as well as all the services that they've provided. So now, for the third session, let's hear first-hand experience from some of the local communities that we've identified. So with us today, I think this is perhaps the most interesting section for today, where we will hear experience on how mangroves provide benefits in the form of fisheries resources. For example, we all know that mangroves are the nursery grounds, the breeding grounds for fish, but most of us living in the cities, we bought fish from the market, right? So, but then some of these communities actually catch fish and they benefit from the protection of mangroves. So, we have three actually groups of communities or individuals, and the first group is actually our friends from Kubang Badak in Langkawi. And for the first session from the community, we would like to thank the Langkawi Development Authority for hosting it remotely in Langkawi for the community to actually communicate with us today. So can we have our friends in Langkawi on screen now? So basically throughout Malaysia, coastal communities living on the coast highly depend on mangrove ecosystem for their subsistence and their livelihoods. So, and then as you all know, many of us would go to the coastline, to the coastal area, to the coastal village to go get our ikan bakar, ketam bakar, siput bakar.
Ketam rebus.
There you go. Cik Sabri, apa khabar?
Bagus, Alhamdulillah Doktor, selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi, Assalamualaikum. Dan kita juga ada Pak Abu. Pak Abu okey ke nak dengar suara sikit?
Ya. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam. Okay, so just to inform our international participant, some of the conversation will be converse in bahasa Malaysia, but I will try to recap and maybe summarize a little bit later, ya. Tapi Encik Sabri dengan Pak Abu kalau nak cakap orang putih, kita on. Okay, no problem.
Okay.
So terima kasih banyak untuk masa dan meluangkan masa lah untuk sesi kita pada hari ini. Dan saya juga saya diberitahu dekat Langkawi ada lah beberapa celebration, ada beberapa keraian sepanjang hujung minggu baru ni. Dan saya juga dapat tengok Encik Sabri punya radio punya session bercerita budaya kita, saya tengok
KBFM, Kubang Badak FM.
Apa nama Langkawi apa FM?
Kubang Badak FM.
Kubang Badak FM, that's right.
Kubang Badak FM.
Kubang Badak FM. So untuk makluman semua juga, sambutan ni bukan saja kita raikan di peringkat kebangsaan, di peringkat antarabangsa, tapi sebenarnya yang meraikan hari ini adalah komuniti-komuniti tempatan yang mana mereka memang dah daripada zaman berzaman bergenerasi bergantung kepada hutan bakau. Jadi kita nak dengar daripada Pak Abu mungkin pengalaman sebagai nelayan dan macam mana dalam tempoh sepanjang hidup Pak Abu kebergantungan kepada hutan bakau dan kebergantungan kepada sumber perikanan memberi kebaikan ataupun memberi pendapatan lah kepada komuniti. Dan Pak Abu sendiri, kalau boleh Pak Abu bercerita.
Ya, terima kasih Doktor. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi semua, selamat pagi satu Malaysia. Good morning.
Ohayo gozaimasu.
Selamat pagi Doktor sekali lagi. Saya Abu Biramli, berasal dari Kampung Ewa lah, dia berhampiran Kubang Badak. Saya lebih dikenali lah dengan Pakcik Abu di kawasan tempatan lah, di Kubang Badak. Saya sebenarnya pengalaman sebagai seorang nelayan ni lebih kurang 42 tahun Doktor. Memang panjang lah masa tu. Saya dicalonkan sebagai ketua komuniti di Sungai Kubang Badak pun berdasarkan pengalaman sebagai seorang nelayan. Untuk maklumat doktor lah, saya mengaji tak tinggi, sebab itulah saya sebagai nelayan awal. Nelayan awal sampai ke ini dah 42 tahun lebih kurang. Bermacam-macam aktiviti nelayan lah, kalau disebut pun banyak juga. Sebagai seorang nelayan ni bermacam-macam dugaan lah yang ditempuhi di dalam laut sebagai seorang nelayan. Di mana saja pun dia akan merasai suasana di laut, baik dia, manis dia, macam itulah. Di bawah kelolaan saya lah, masa sekarang ni di Pekalang Kubang Badak mempunyai lebih kurang 120 ke 130 orang ahli nelayan Sungai Kubang Badak, dan mempunyai sampan lebih kurang 70 ke 80 buah lah sampan. Itu. Pengalaman saya yang memakan masa panjang di laut sebagai seorang nelayan, saya sebagai nelayan pukat hanyut yang memakan masa yang panjang. Pukat hanyut, pukat hanyut itu pun bermacam-macam jenis ikan lah. Satu jenis pukat dia satu dua jenis ikan, dan lain-lain alat tangkapan lah. Contoh dia macam pukat hanyut bawal tambak, pukat hanyut senangin, pukat hanyut gerut, pukat udang sebagainya kan, macam merawai. Ini semua alat-alat tangkapan seorang nelayan. Dia tahulah apa yang alat apa yang dia perlu guna semasa dia nak ke laut. Itu adalah pengalaman-pengalaman seorang nelayan. Ya, doktor. Itu
Okay,
dulu.
alright. Okey, jadi sepanjang 42 tahun tu Pak Bu, maknanya Pak Bu lihat okey, boleh tak kalau saya nak tanya Pak Bu punya pengalaman di laut di laut dekat lah, dia bukan di laut lepas kan, ataupun jauh daripada di laut dekat, dan juga Pak Bu membesar kat Kampung Ewa dekat kawasan Kubang Badak. Ada tak Pak Bu lihat perubahan dari dalam hutan bakau tu dengan hasil tangkapan ikan ke sepanjang 42 tahun?
Sebenarnya peningkatan Kubang Badak daripada tahun 80-an sehingga kini, sehingga tahun 2020, perkembangan amat memerangsangkan lah, doktor. Sebenarnya antara bakau dan laut ini dia hubungan yang amat penting, dan banyak ekosistem dia. Mungkin sebentar lagi sahabat saya Encik Sabri akan cerita masalah bakau ni. Dia lebih arif, dan dia selalu berdamping dengan profesor kita yang mana dari UiTM, UKM, USM, macam-macam U lah, sudi ke Kubang Badak untuk bersama-sama kami. Dan masalah-masalah bio ni kita akan jemput Encik Sabri sebentar lagi untuk dia cerita lebih mendalam lagi. Dia lebih arif pada saya masalah bakau ni. Ya, itu dulu.
Okey Pak Bu. Okey, jadi kita kalau ada problem kat Kubang Badak memang kita akan cari Encik Sabri, betul tak?
Ya, betul.
Okey. Okey, apa nama okey, jadi macam mana Cik Sabri boleh explain hubungan antara hutan bakau dengan hasil tangkapan ikan kan. Mungkin Cik Sabri ada macam maklumat ringkas lah, maknanya hasil tangkapan tu sentiasa ada ke, ataupun ada gangguan-gangguan ekosistem yang memberi impak kepada perikanan dan komuniti nelayan kita dekat Kubang Badak. Boleh cerita sikit?
Okay, Assalamualaikum, selamat pagi, salam sejahtera kepada semua prof-prof, doktor-doktor yang live yang sekarang ni, yang boleh live ni. Kami pun rasa macam ketak juga ni nak berdepan dengan prof dan juga doktor yang berada dalam live ni, sebab kami daripada nelayan pesisiran pantai di kawasan Kubang Badak. Nama saya Sabri bin Musa, dulu memegang jugalah jawatan ahli jawatankuasa di dalam Persatuan Nelayan dan juga bidang koperasi nelayan lah, kita tumpukan koperasi. Jadi nak cerita sikit pasal kepentingan hutan bayar bakau kepada manusia ni. Sebenarnya hutan bayar bakau ni merupakan satu ekosistem yang unik lah, yang terletak di sepadan antara laut dan juga darat. Hutan bayar bakau mempunyai kepentingan dalam kehidupan manusia dan juga kehidupan liar yang mendiami di hutan bayar bakau itu sendiri. Manusia sebenarnya bergantung kepada produk hutan bakau ni dan sumber perikanan. Ia juga menyumbang kepada perlindungan pantai daripada hakisan ombak dan juga melindungi persekitaran daripada perubahan cuaca yang melampau. Contohnya macam ombak, macam hujan lebat, arus yang deras kan. Jadi masa tsunami pada tahun 2014, Alhamdulillah Kubang Badak memang tak terkena sikit pun. Cuma ada arus saja yang masuk, cuma tak terkena tsunami. Sebab yang penting payah bakau kita cantik, jadi dia jadi macam satu protect lah kepada hakisan perlindungan daripada terus masuk ke kampung lah. Alhamdulillah, kalau kawasan lain yang kita tengok yang tak ada payah bakau tu, dia direct terus kena. Sampai boot pun sampai bersusun-susun ni jadi betul. Jadi kalau apa yang kita tengok tu, payah bakau ni amat penting kepada manusia dan juga kepada ekosistem kita lah. Jadi di payah bakau sendiri, kalau kita tengok sumber-sumber makanan kita, contoh macam ikan, anak-anak udang, ketam, dia akan sebelum dia membesar, sebelum dia pergi ke laut macam Pak Abu cerita tadi, dia akan berada di akar-akar bakau, di kawasan payah bakau, dia akan bertelur, lepas tu dia akan menetas di situ, lepas tu dia akan membiak di situ. Apabila dia membesar, dia akan ikut arus hayat daripada sungai ke laut. Jadi payah bakau ni amat penting kepada sumber perikanan kita dan juga pembenihan dan juga ekosistem yang perlu kita jaga. Memang kami pun memang cinta dan sayang sangat pada payah bakau, pokok-pokok bakau ni. Kalau kita tengok orang terbang bakau rasa macam tak ada apa, tapi lah ni macam rasa sayang. Sebab dia nak tumbuh benda tu, dia nak hidup payah bakau tu, dia mengambil masa 2 tahun, 4 tahun baru berapa meter je tinggi. Jadi yang ada payah bakau yang cantik tu dia makan masa beratus tahun. Jadi cukup sayang. Kalau kata kita tak jaga, siapa lagi nak jaga kan? Sebab dia melibatkan semua makanan, sumber makanan dalam sungai, ikan macam-macam. Sebab payah bakau ni dia air masin, jadi ada ikan kerapu, ikan jenahak, ikan pari, ikan ketam, macam ketam nipah. Jadi sumber makanan yang cukup banyak. Jadi amat penting kita jaga ekosistem kita. Satu lagi, pencemaran. Tapi alhamdulillah lah di Kubang Badak doktor, kita jauh daripada pencemaran darat. Contoh macam mungkin ada racun ke, macam ada aktiviti yang tak sihat lah pada kelang-kelang tu. Nasiblah alhamdulillah kita tak ada. Jadi payah bakau kita kalau berkesempatan nanti boleh ke Kubang Badak, kita tengok dia punya orang kata pembiakan dia tu cukup merangsang dan cantik sangat. Kita boleh tengok kehijauan payah bakau tu, rasa sejuk hati tu. Itulah pentingnya. Lepas tu macam kita untuk dapatkan ikan, kita ada kaedah macam-macam tu. Untuk dapatkan ikan ni macam nelayan, Pak Abu tadi dia pergi ke laut menangkap ikan menggunakan kaedah bukan. Ada juga yang menggunakan kaedah menangkui ketam. Jadi nelayan ni dia pelbagai aktiviti. Masing-masing lah dia minat macam mana nak tangkui ketam. Petang-petang alhamdulillah lumayan ketam nipah, kalau tak silap saya pasaran RM50 1 kilo. 2 ekor ada tu. Kalau dia boleh dapat 4 ekor dah boleh dapat RM200 sehari. Kalau sebulan, kalau dia rajin boleh dapat sampai RM5-6,000. Itu antara perkembangan lah daripada dulu sampai sekarang ni. Kita tengok di Langkawi sendiri sebagai Langkawi UNESCO ataupun Langkawi Jopak ni, dia memberi kelebihan lah kepada nelayan. Sebab pelancong main ni dia tak kira duit lah. Dia datang ke Langkawi, dia nak berbelanja, nak makan seafood yang fresh, dia nak tengok sendiri. Jadi kami pun macam di Kubang Badak sendiri doktor, kami ada satu kaedah, kami buat kolam ketam komuniti sendiri. Kita buat kolam ketam nipah, kita nak bagi experience kepada pelancong yang datang ke Kubang Badak, nanti dia boleh tangkui ketam tu, cara menangkap ketam, lepas tu dia boleh timbang, dia boleh bawa ketam tu masuk di restoran. Itu antara yang inilah yang kami duk rekod dalam komuniti ni, aktiviti komuniti untuk merancangkan lagi ekonomi tempatan lah, anak-anak tempatan. Sebab kalau kita tengok lah ni masalah PKP tu mungkin lah ni slow sikit, tapi insyaAllah kita yakin kalau kita tengok dengan pembangunan yang ada, contohnya macam pihak LADA sendiri yang terus membantu pihak komuniti untuk macam kita dibimbing lah doktor. Macam kami ni, komuniti nelayan Kubang Badak ni banyak dibimbing oleh macam UKM, Datuk Profesor Dr. Ibrahim Komo, daripada LADA sendiri, daripada UiTM Arau, daripada USM, banyaklah universiti yang turun macam pihak LADA, Perikanan, LKM, semualah agensi kerajaan yang membantu komuniti ni untuk didik kita lah. Sebab kami ni nelayan yang kecil-kecilan ni tak berapa pandai sangat, jadi kita belajarlah daripada step by step. Lepas tu anak-anak tempatan pun ada yang masuk ngaji universiti, jadi kita join sekali lah untuk kita merancangkan ekonomi. Jadi hakikatnya kita nak beritahu kat sini, paya bakau amat penting kepada ekosistem perikanan kita. Sebab tanpa bakau, dia lebih kurang macam ni lah doktor, kalau kita tak ada rumah, tempat mana kita nak duduk. Jadi ikan pun macam tu, bila dia ada pokok bakau, ada rumah dia akan membiak. Tu kita tak cerita pasal dukun ataupun kora-kora lagi. Jadi dia memang kena seiring lah. Amat penting.
Terima kasih banyak. Itulah bila bersembang orang Langkawi ni tak sabar pula dah saya nak pergi Langkawi ni. Aduh, dah 3 bulan PKP.
Silakan.
Okey. Jadi dengan jelas, saya rasa Cik Sabri dengan Pak Abu dah cerita macam mana pentingnya hutan bakau dengan perusahaan oleh nelayan yang tangkap ikan dekat dengan mangrove, dengan hutan bakau, dan juga nelayan-nelayan yang keluar. Sebab kita pun semua tahu macam Cik Sabri dengan Pak Abu sebut tadi, dia benih, dia bertelur, dia membesar dekat dalam hutan bakau, baru dia pergi ke laut lepas. Jadi kalau tak adanya hutan bakau ni untuk ikan bertelur, macam mana kita dapat ikan laut lepas pun kan. Jadi dalam masa yang sama dia menjaga kestabilan lah ekosistem. Bila ada habitat, tempat tinggal macam Cik Sabri kata, dan dia memberi peluang untuk semua kitaran hidup atau kitaran rantaian makanan dalam ekosistem. Tapi saya suka juga sebut dengar bila Cik Sabri sebut Kubang Badak terhalang oleh impak tsunami tahun 2004 dulu. Memang jelas. Okey. Satu lagi perkara yang saya suka tentang kajian tentang hutan bakau ni, sebab kebergantungan manusia terhadap hutan bakau ni, dia mendapat perlindungan daripada hutan bakau kan. Jadi orang dulu tak silap saya di Langkawi pun sama, dia tak tebang pokok bakau tu nak buat rumah, nak buat kampung kan. Dia akan berlindung di belakang hutan bakau. Dan daripada situ dia berkampung, and then dia jadi nelayan, mendapat hasil hutan tapi dia protect. Okey, jadi ada satu okey, kita ada peminat lah. Peminat ada salah satu soalan dia. Okey, sebab yalah kita pun limited masa kan. Tapi terima kasih kepada Pak Abu dan Cik Sabri sebab dah jelas menceritakan kepentingan hutan bakau kepada perikanan. Okey, sekarang ni kalau boleh, okey. Alright. So soalan daripada salah seorang kita punya penonton ataupun peserta pada hari ini, daripada Puan Fung Ling. Dia tanya, adakah macam tadi Cik Sabri dah sebut dekat Kubang Badak mungkin tak jelas lah pencemaran daripada pembangunan dekat bandar, dekat keliling Kubang Badak, sebab kawasan Kubang Badak, Kampung Ewa pun masih tak ada pembangunan yang sangat drastik lagi. Tapi soalan daripada Puan Fung Ling ni, dia tanya mungkin pengetahuan ataupun pengalaman Cik Sabri dengan Pak Abu dekat tempat lain, kot dah pernah melawat ke, pencemaran daripada plastik, for example, plastik pollution. Kan, pencemaran plastik ni mungkin akan memberi kesan kepada, mungkin kita nak dengar mungkin daripada pandangan Pak Abu dengan Cik Sabri. Dan lanjutan daripada soalan tentang pencemaran plastik ni, kata mungkin juga hutan bakau boleh terdedah pada pencemaran lain. So tadi bila Cik Sabri dah sebut pembangunan yang berlaku di Langkawi, maknanya dulu daripada orang tak kenal, kata orang macam tak ada orang pun pernah pergi Langkawi sebelum tahun 80-an dulu agaknya. Lepas tu bila jadi duty free island 1985, start datang pelancong-pelancong lokal kan, pelancong-pelancong Malaysia. Lepas tu 2007 pula jadi National Geopark dengan Global Geopark. Tu dia Global Geopark ni adalah satu labeling yang sangat penting untuk Langkawi. Dia label lah, dia brand yang menarik satu dunia ke Langkawi. Jadi daripada pembangunan ni semua, boleh tak Pak Abu lebih cerita kalau ada impact kepada hutan bakau, dan juga adakah dia memberi impact yang positif kepada komuniti, dan adakah ada peralihan daripada menjadi nelayan saja kepada mungkin menjadi pemain industri pelancongan? Okey, silakan.
Ya, terima kasih Doktor. Sebenarnya sampah ini dianggap sebagai ancaman besar untuk masyarakat dan manusia lah. Sampah ini yang berbentuk plastik, dia semua sedia maklum, dia susah nak lupus dia. Dan di Kubang Badak kami selalu adakan aktiviti mencuci kawasan-kawasan yang selalu sampah, kita tahulah sebagai nelayan di kawasan sekitar nelayan Kubang Badak, di komuniti yang ke laut tu, dia akan tahu dekat mana sampah yang selalu dinaikkan oleh ombak. Sampah ni sebenarnya berpunca daripada manusia juga yang tidak bertanggungjawab. Dan kalau semua ambil berat dan bertanggungjawab masalah sampah-sampah ni, laut bukan jadi tong sampah. Sebenarnya yang tidak bertanggungjawab, dia anggap laut sebagai tong sampah. Dan yang mengambil berat tentang sampah ini terpaksa menanggung beban yang begitu berat lah kalau dikirakan. Sampah-sampah ini apabila turun ke laut, ombak akan bawa naik ke darat. Dan ini tanggungjawab komuniti di sekitar lah. Kita tak cakaplah di Kubang Badak saja, di mana-mana saja yang komuniti nelayan mesti duduk berhampiran laut dan akan terima akibatnya daripada manusia yang tak bertanggungjawab ini. Itu kata-kata yang rasa
hikmat.
korang enak aku, Doktor.
No, kata-kata hikmat pada saya tu. Cik Sabri, kalau nak buat satu summary.
Doktor, saya nak sambung sikit.
Ya, Cik Sabri nak sambung sikit.
Saya nak sambung sikit, Doktor. Masalah sampah ni yang paling kritikal, masalah plastik lah kan. Macam di kawasan Kubang Badak sendiri, kita berhampiran dengan negara jiran iaitu Thailand. Jadi sampah ni kadang-kadang bila air pasang dia akan naik ke Pulau Langkawi. Bila dia surut dia akan pergi Thailand. Jadi ada yang terlekat di Paya Bakau dan sekitar kawasan-kawasan lah, tapi taklah banyak kritikal sangat, Doktor. Jadi kami pun di Kubang Badak sendiri, komuniti macam seminggu sekali kita ada buat rondaan bersama dengan komuniti, ada tim-tim lah yang mencintai Paya Bakar dan juga orang kata alam sekitar ni. Kita akan ikuti sampah lah, kita akan ikuti sampah, bola plastik. Macam ekor pelancongan kita pun, but-but kita sediakan plastik sampah. Jadi botol plastik yang pelancong bawa makan but tu, kita akan masukkan dalam plastik, kita akan bawa naik ke darat lah, kita tak akan buang ke laut. Jadi macam kami pun dalam mesyuarat komuniti, mesyuarat agung komuniti nelayan ni, kita war-warkan selalu kepada komuniti sampah dan minyak-minyak hitam dan sebagainya kita tak buang di dalam air laut atau air sungai, supaya dia tak memberi kesan lah kepada Paya Bakau. Sebab kalau kita kena jaga apa yang ada di situ seperti macam rumah kita. Kalau kita nak kebersihan macam rumah kita, buat di situ pun jiwa kita kena dididik selalulah. Sebab dalam Islam pun sendiri menuntut kebersihan lah, Doktor. Jadi dan satu lagi, Doktor, bulan 9 September ni kami baru dapat macam CSR lah daripada daripada Bank Rakyat daripada Kuala Lumpur, akan bersama-sama dengan kita untuk aktiviti cuci pantai, cuci Paya Bakau dan juga tanam mangrove. Kita buat pembenihan mangrove untuk mendidik lah supaya mangrove ni amat penting kepada kehidupan kita lah. Itu antara program-program CSR yang selalu kita buat lah, Bank Rakyat dengan bank-bank ataupun dengan pelajar-pelajar universiti lah, Doktor.
Okey. Okey, jadi pelibatan daripada komuniti, pelibatan daripada syarikat korporat dan juga sokongan daripada agensi kerajaan macam LADA, pejabat daerah, pejabat majlis kan. Ini semua kena bekerjasama lah, dan kita juga ucapkan selamat maju jaya kepada kumpulan komuniti Kubang Badak, dan juga semua aktiviti-aktiviti pembangunan yang dibangunkan untuk komuniti nelayan dekat Kubang Badak jugalah. Sebab dengan kerjasama ni lah, macam kita discuss juga sebelum dalam sesi-sesi sebelum ni tadi, kerjasama ni sebenarnya yang membuahkan hasil dalam bentuk perlindungan hutan bakau. Tapi saya nak highlight balik apa yang Pak Abu sebut tadi, betul. Pada saya tu kata-kata hikmat tu. Maksudnya sampah ni kita yang buat. Tapi bila kita tak uruskan dengan baik, impact dia datang balik pada kita. Dia kitaran yang tak berapa bagus lah, kitaran yang tak baik kan. Jadi dia bukan saja bagi impact kepada kita, tapi sumber perikanan tu juga kan. Ikan ni nanti makan plastik kita. Lepas tu dah elok-elok kita promote orang untuk datang Langkawi pergi tengok Kubang Badak, sekali ada sampah macam mana pula kan. Spoil lah mood orang kan. Okay. Jadi dengan jelas kita dah dapat pandangan yang direct daripada Pak Abu dengan Cik Sabri. Saya kena book tiket nak pergi Langkawi lah ni. Bila lagi boleh pergi.
Silakan.
Okey, jadi terima kasih banyak Cik Sabri, terima kasih banyak Pak Bu.
Sama.
Atas masa yang diberikan, atas perkongsian tadi. Mungkin kita akan dapat berjumpa lagi dalam sesi yang lain yang akan datang untuk sesi perkongsian yang lain.
InsyaAllah.
Tapi kita ucapkan selamat maju jaya dengan usaha-usaha yang dijalankan oleh komuniti dengan masyarakat setempat, dengan kerajaan negeri dan juga LADA di Kubang Badak. Dah sebut LADA, kita nak ucapkan terima kasih kepada Cik Suri dan juga CEO LADA, Dr. Hezri Adnan, atas kerjasama yang kita ada pada hari ini menjadi host untuk sesi perbincangan kita pada hari ini. Jadi selamat maju jaya. Terima kasih banyak. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. So we received an excellent insights from the local communities. The fishermen benefits directly from protection or conservation of mangroves. So it was evident that fish use mangroves as their breeding ground and spawning ground. So for fishermen, near shore fishermen and offshore fishermen, they know that they rely on these habitats as the fish are dependent on the mangrove as well. And at the same time, fishing communities are protected from impacts like tsunami, as highlighted by Encik Sabri and Pak Abu just now. During the 2004 tsunami, Kubang Badak was totally protected. They just received wave, like slight increase in wave, but no further impact from there. And then of course, being a downstream ecosystem, downstream habitat, there are influenced by pollution happening upstream. So whatever pollution happening, like for example plastic pollution, marine debris will end up in mangrove, and that will affect the livelihood of the ecosystems downstream, as well as the communities. Okay, so that's the end of the first group of local communities that benefits direct from mangroves. Next, we have a lady this time representing the Penang Inshore Fisheries Welfare Association, which is based in Penang. And this community is super interesting because they don't just fish for their livelihoods, but they are way creative and innovative by producing some sustainable products coming from their mangroves. So kita ada Puan Siti Hajar. Apa khabar Puan Siti Hajar?
Baik.
Okey,
baik
dah
doktor.
makan, Oi, dah pukul 12, dah makan tengah hari ke?
Pukul 12. Makan dah. Pagi tadi makan dah.
Okey, pagi tadi makan apa, boleh saya tanya?
Pagi tadi makan nasi lemak doktor.
Oh, okey, nasi lemak. Okey, alright. Ada minum jus berembang sekali dengan nasi lemak ke atau macam mana? Ke minum teh jeruju?
Oh, tak minum.
Okey, alright. Jadi tadi kita dah dengar daripada komuniti Langkawi kebergantungan mereka sebagai nelayan dan dapat kepentingan yang direct lah daripada sekitar hutan bakau yang berada di sekitar mereka. Sama juga saya rasa dengan masyarakat di Sungai Aceh ya, di Pulau Pinang, yang kebergantungan dia yang yang abang-abang ya, pakcik-pakcik, bapak-bapak semua kebanyakannya nelayan akan bergantung direct daripada hasil perikanan. Tapi saya diberitahu komuniti Pifua ada satu branch nama dia Pifua Nita yang mempunyai produk yang amat menarik. Boleh tak Puan Siti Hajar cerita sikit kat semua orang yang nak dengar hari ini?
Okey. Assalamualaikum dan selamat tengah hari lah. Okey, saya Siti Hajar Abdul Aziz, pengerusi untuk kumpulan Pifua Nita di Sungai Aceh lah. Jadi kumpulan Pifua Nita ni kami tubuhkan pada bulan 3 tahun 2013 lah. Dan kami mempunyai 40 orang ahli lah, ada yang suri rumah dan ada juga yang bekerja. Jadi peranan kumpulan Pifua Nita ni kami tubuhkan adalah bertujuan untuk membantu Pifua dalam aktiviti mempromosikan alam sekitar. Jadi kita percayalah bahawa kumpulan wanita ni lebih cepat mempromosikan alam sekitar ni sebab dia bermula daripada rumah lah bersama keluarga dia. Lepas tu dia boleh bersama kawan-kawan dan seterusnya kepada masyarakat setempat lah. Jadi kumpulan ni juga di samping tu kumpulan ni juga menghasilkan produk-produk daripada spesies-spesies daripada hutan paya bakau sendirilah. Jadi dalam kami mempromosikan alam sekitar tu, kami mendapat tahu daripada pengerusi Persatuan Kebajikan Nelayan Pantai sendiri, iaitu Cik Ilyas Syafi'i lah, bahawa ada spesies daripada hutan paya bakau tu yang kita boleh jadikan produk makanan. Jadi daripada situ kami cuba untuk menghasilkan, kami cuba untuk belajar dah dan menghasilkan produk daripada spesies-spesies yang kami dapat tahu tu dah. Jadi dekat sini kami ada beberapa jenis spesies yang kami proses dan kami jadikan produk makanan lah. Seperti jeruju. Okey, ini adalah daun jeruju. Di mana kami memproses daun jeruju ni dan kami jadikan teh. Teh lah. Okey, supaya senang untuk kita.
Jeruju tu Puan Siti Hajar.
Ya. Okey.
Dengan daun dia.
Okey.
Jangan tutup muka.
Okey, supaya senang untuk kita makan lah. Kalau jeruju teh ni senang lah kita bancuh, kita boleh minum terus lah kan. Okey. Yang kedua adalah berembang lah. Yang ini adalah buah berembang. Okey. Buah berembang ni kami proses, kami jadikan jam lah. Jam. So inilah adalah produk daripada Pifua Nita juga. Okey, kami proses, kami jadikan jam dan juga yang ni adalah jus lah. Jus daripada buah berembang. Jus laris. Okey. Yang ni adalah produk terbaru lah daripada Pifua Nita lah. Nah, okey, seterusnya buah api-api. Okey, yang ni adalah buah api-api. Buah api-api ni kita proses, kita jadikan produk makanan. Dia boleh menggantikan kacang lah. Jadi kita proses, kita jadikan kuih, lepat dan juga biskut lah. Biskut yang mana menggunakan kacang, kita boleh gantikan dengan buah api-api. Dan seterusnya buah berus. Ini adalah buah berus. So buah berus ni kita jadikan produk makanan seperti bubur lah, bubur caca. Okay, kita kena proses dia, makan masa jugalah untuk kita jadikan bubur caca lah. Okay. Dan daripada situ kami produk-produk yang kami hasilkan tu kami proses, kemudian kami jual di sendirilah. Jadi produk ni tidak ada lagi di mana-mana pasaran lah buat masa sekarang. Jadi kami promosi dan kami jual sendirilah di tempat kami di Sungai Aceh. Jadi promosi ni kami ikut serta bersama P4 lah ke seluruh semenanjung Malaysia lah. Jadi bila P4 dijemput untuk mengadakan bengkel ataupun pameran, jadi kami akan turut serta untuk membawa produk kami bersama dan mempromosikan di setiap tempat yang kami dijemput lah. Jadi produk kami juga selain daripada mempromosikan produk kami juga diminta untuk menjadi berkongsi pengalaman tentang macam mana cara-cara untuk kami hasilkan produk-produk ni. Jadi kami buat sesi demo masakan lah di setiap tempat yang kami diminta untuk kami buat lah. Okey, kami yang macam mana produk ni doktor kami boleh dapatkan di tempat kami di Sungai Aceh. So di Sungai Aceh kita ada satu pusat pendidikan kecil hutan paya laut lah, di mana di situ juga kami memproses produk teh dan juga jam berembang. Jadi sesiapa yang berminat nanti bolehlah datang ke Sungai Aceh sendirilah untuk melihat macam mana cara pemprosesan produk daripada kumpulan wanita lah. Okey. Untuk produk ni juga doktor, kami menghantar kepada kesihatan untuk kami cek sama ada dia selamat digunakan ataupun tidak. Jadi bila kami mendapat keputusan daripada kesihatan bahawa dia selamat, kami juga ada kerjasama bersama FRIM lah untuk kajian seterusnya tentang keberkesanan produk ni lah. Jadi bila selamat barulah kami cuba mempromosikan dengan lebih orang cakap lebih ni lah, lebih kuat lah sekarang ni. So mungkin lepas ni kita boleh dapatkan lah lebih ni lah produk ni di pasaran, mungkin ada lah selepas ni lah, lepas kerjasama kajian yang akan dijalankan oleh FRIM nantilah. Ya, doktor.
Okey. Terima kasih banyak Puan Siti Hajar. Tu dia saya mula dengar cerita pasal jus berembang saya pernah dengar. Lepas tu teh jeruju. Tapi yang lain ni rupanya banyak lagi produk yang lain ya. Saya tahu sebenarnya.
Ya, banyak.
Saya acah-acah aja. Tapi maknanya saya juga suka dengan poin Puan Siti Hajar tadi mengatakan bahawa produk ni juga mendapat kerjasama dengan Kementerian Kesihatan, dapat kerjasama daripada FRIM ya untuk kita kajilah betul-betul keberkesanan ataupun khasiat daripada yang datang daripada hutan bakau ni. Jadi juga saya nak mungkin satu soalan yang berkait dengan produk ni. Maknanya ada tak kolaborasi juga dengan Jabatan Perhutanan ke ataupun kerajaan negeri, macam mana komuniti nak kawal, maknanya kalau semua orang dah tahu pasal kesedapan jus Soneratia Caceolaris ni, mungkin nanti semua orang akan try nak petik buah berembang nanti kan. Jadi macam mana kaedah atau kerjasama komuniti dengan pihak berkuasa tempatan ke, dengan Jabatan Perhutanan ke, dan juga mungkin nasihat kepada komuniti-komuniti lain, macam mana cara kita nak gunakan sumber ni secara lestari. Maknanya kita tak naklah semua buah tu kita jadikan jus kan. Kita nak juga anak-anak pokok tu tumbuh secara semula jadi. Jadi macam mana cadangan Puan Siti Hajar, macam mana kita nak kawal komuniti daripada mengeluarkan ataupun menguruskan atau mengeluarkan produk secara lestari.
Okey doktor. Ya, kami memang ada kerjasama lah dengan Jabatan Hutan. Okey. Kami memang di bawah Jabatan Hutan lah. P4 sendiri di bawah Jabatan Hutan lah. Jadi untuk penghasilan produk ni kita memang menggunakan buah yang matang sajalah. Jadi kalau buah yang tak matang ni memang kita tak kutip lah dan kita tak galakkan untuk kita jadikan produk makanan lah. Jadi kita cuba bagi tahu kepada setiap tempat masyarakat yang kita pergi bahawa kita hasilkan produk makanan ni daripada spesies-spesies yang matang saja. Jadi yang tak matang memang kita tak kutip dan kita pelihara sampai dia matang dululah. Okey.
Okey. Terima kasih banyak Puan Siti Hajar. Do you have question from the community? Okay. Alright. Okay. And then apa nama? Okay. Jadi tadi bila Puan Siti Hajar kata maknanya sebelum kita menghasilkan produk ni, maknanya adakah produk-produk yang dikeluarkan ni maknanya macam api-api tadi boleh jadi bubur kacang kan, boleh jadi lepat. Dah berapa lama pengetahuan tentang buah-buah bakau ni boleh dijadikan makanan ataupun jadikan produk? Sejak bila tahu? Baru tahu ke atau dah berzaman-zaman dah jadi resepi orang Sungai Aceh?
Saya kalau untuk kumpulan Beef Wanita ni kami start dapat tahu ni bahawa daripada mula-mula kami tubuh lah. So daripada 2013 lah, tapi diberitahu kepada kami oleh Cik Ilyas sendiri bahawa orang dulu-dulu memang menggunakan spesies-spesies ni, mereka makan spesies-spesies ni kan, tapi tak ada lah proses untuk jadikan macam kita lah ni, kita ubah sesuai untuk kita bagi mudah untuk orang makan kan. So bila orang tengok apa tu buah berembang, orang tahu itu jam, orang baru makan. So kalau dia tengok buah berembang macam tu saja, mungkin dia rasa heran kot dia nak makan macam mana kan. Jadi kita cuma olahkan benda tu menjadi lebih, orang cakap lebih mudah dikenali dan mudah untuk kita makan lah. Macam tu lah doktor. Kalau daripada untuk orang dulu-dulu memang mereka ambil macam tu, mereka makan macam tu. Kalau untuk berembang tu boleh makan buah dia tu, cicah garam macam tu je kan. Kalau untuk berus pun macam tu juga, boleh makan dengan kelapa parut. Macam tu orang dulu-dulu makan.
Ya, ada macam buat macam candy pun ada. Saya tengok dia masuk dalam peti sejuk kan. Jadi kerah dia macam kacang macam tu. Okay, terima kasih. Terima kasih banyak. Saya sebenarnya nampak CP-CP Pak Ilyas dekat kamera tu. Boleh tak? Boleh kamera tu pusing sikit bagi nampak sikit Pak Ilyas.
Boleh.
Kan dia malu kah?
Tu
dia. Okey.
Setengah hari.
Apa khabar?
Saya sebenarnya merajuk.
Awak merajuk.
Sebab saya nak bagi orang kuat kita cakap lah. Nanti saya cakap lagi dia terlupa nak cakap dah.
Jangan merajuk orang kuat.
Sebenarnya saya tambah sikit saya doktor.
Boleh.
Boleh saya tambah sikit?
Boleh.
Sebenarnya produk yang kita buat untuk makan ni, orang dulu masa Jepun, saya tanya-tanya orang tua-tua semua, mereka makan. Tapi cara mereka makan, proses macam kita pun ikut orang dulu lah. Kan, dengan rendam aja. Tapi dia makan, dia rebus, dia makan dengan nyok pokok tu, dia panggil kelapa kan. Kita utara dia panggil nyok. Nyok pokok gula sikit tu, dia cicah macam tu, makan macam ubi. Jadi makan nasi mungkin sehari sekali orang dulu. Jadi dia gunakan bahan ni lah untuk menambah pada pemakanan ni. Itulah.
Ini ilmu baru ni. Maknanya yalah dia kita kan sekarang orang sekarang nak kurangkan makan nasi lah, apalah karbohidrat. So mungkin ini adalah resepi orang Jepun dulu-dulu, dan orang kampung dulu-dulu pun menggunakan resepi yang sama. Tapi menarik juga kalau kita nak teruskan kajian mengenai perkara ni kan. Jadi saya yakin ada juga kumpulan-kumpulan penyelidikan daripada luar kumpulan penyelidikan yang bekerjasama dengan PIFWA dan Beef Wanita kan dalam untuk mengkaji dengan lebih dalam lah tentang produk-produk ni. Jadi satu perkara yang saya kena puji kepada komuniti di Sungai Aceh ni PIFWA, saya kena highlightkan kepada semua penonton bahawa kebergantungan atau fahaman masyarakat komuniti Sungai Aceh ni pada hutan bakau sebenarnya bukan baru. Jadi sebelum tsunami pada 2004 dulu, komuniti dekat Sungai Aceh dah pun menjalankan restoration program apabila mereka tahu kawasan yang tiada kelulusan di clearkan, kawasan hutan bakau di clearkan untuk tak tahu apa tujuannya, tapi komuniti bekerjasama dengan pihak kuasa tempatan untuk memelihara kawasan hutan bakau di sekitar mereka. Dan bila datang tsunami itu tak banyak impact lah kepada masyarakat yang dilindungi oleh hutan bakau ni. Jadi advance-nya lagi macam tadi Puan Siti Hajar dah ada sikit promotion lah, maknanya dengan sokongan daripada kita dan juga dengan menghasilkan produk ni secara lestari, kita boleh memberi impact yang positif lah, memberi nilai ekonomi ataupun income pendapatan kepada komuniti yang menghasilkan produk daripada hutan bakau. Jadi mungkin ada cara macam mana kalau komuniti kalau masyarakat, kalau penonton kita pada hari ni nak beli produk ataupun nak tanya pasal produk, ada boleh bagi email address ke atau website ke, Facebook ke? Ada 10 saat lagi boleh Puan Siti Hajar boleh.
Ya, Doktor. Okey, ni masa untuk saya promosi pula lah produk produk ni, no. Okey, kepada semua penonton-penonton, jadi kalau nak dapatkan produk daripada Pifu Wanita ni, boleh dapatkan di Sungai Aceh ataupun email kepada pifuasungai-aceh@gmail.com. Okay, pifuasungai-aceh@gmail.com, ataupun boleh telefon kami atau saya sendiri di nombor telefon 0111 5080 ataupun kami boleh post lah. Bila ada order tu nanti kami akan post lah. Ya, Doktor.
Alright. So, terima kasih banyak saya nak ucapkan kepada Puan Siti Hajar. Tu kamera tu terjatuh sikit. Kena angkat, tak nampak muka. Okey, nampak muka. Kita nak ucapkan terima kasih atas masa yang diberikan oleh Puan Siti Hajar dengan Pak Ilyas dan juga Pifwa dan Pifu Wanita untuk berkongsi dengan kita bukan saja bergantungan manusia tu hanya kepada ikan, ya, kepada seafood, tapi juga pokok-pokok bakau itu sendiri menghasilkan makanan yang boleh dinikmati oleh komuniti. Tapi pada masa yang sama, terima kasih juga atas nasihat dan peringatan, maknanya kita nak exploitkan sumber-sumber ni, kita buat secara berhemah lah, secara lestari. Maknanya kita ada garis panduan. Saya rasa saya nak bekerjasama dengan komuniti Pifwa. Mungkin kita boleh sama-sama bangunkan kaedah ataupun penghasilan produk ataupun penggunaan sumber secara lestari. Mungkin kita boleh jadikan aktiviti ataupun aktiviti yang dah dibuat oleh Pifwa ni sebagai panduan pula kepada komuniti di seluruh Malaysia, ya. Mungkin juga boleh dijadikan sesi perkongsian. Ada komuniti lain yang tengok pada hari ni, kita pun buat benda yang sama, kita ada produk ni juga. So sesi kita mungkin boleh adakan perkongsian antara komuniti-komuniti tentang produk-produk yang berbeza, kan? Okey. So terima kasih banyak atas masa yang diberikan. Terima kasih banyak juga atas usaha. Kita ucapkan selamat maju jaya kepada Pifwa dan Pifu Wanita.
Ya, sama.
Ya, kita akan berhubung.
Ya, sama-sama, Doktor.
Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum.
Ya, sama. Waalaikumsalam.
So there you go. Basically, Puan Siti Hajar that represented Pifu Wanita, and you can see later in that presentation Pak Ilyas, which is the chairman of the Penang Inshore Fisheries Welfare Association, has explained to us on the dependence was not only on fisheries resources but also products coming from mangrove fruits, propagules, and fruits and propagules basically. So some of the products are juice and jams coming out from Soneratia cassiolaris, and they are using cassiolaris name as the brand name, which is Laris. And then they also produce tea from acanthus. So of course, we didn't get the whole detail of the process of producing the tea, but we can later on learn from them by contacting them. And of course, they use Avicennia fruits as propagules, as a replacement for nuts, for peanuts, and they put it in other local delicacies. And also, they use Bulgaria parviflora's fruit to make porridge out of it. So these are just some of the products that they've innovatively produced for their consumption, for the community's consumption. But yeah, they are gaining interest from state and national market. So to know more about their products and other things, other conservation work that they've done, you can communicate with them at Pifwa Sungai Aceh, pifwasgacheh@gmail.com. So thank you very much. And we have the final representative of the community today to explain to us. We've heard about the importance of mangrove as a fisheries nursery, fish stocks. We also have heard on the women's products from production from mangrove by producing local products like jams and tea and fruits and foods. But we also of late, mangroves are increasingly becoming an attraction for tourism. And some states and some local authorities are gaining a lot of income from the flux of tourists coming to visit these tourism sites. And they can be in the form of a showcase for the ecosystem or habitat itself, as well as wildlife. So with us today is Mr. Mas Budi Abdul Malik, or fondly known as Eddie, which is I think is the chairman of a local NGO called Inspirasi Kawa. So and they are based in Kampung Kuantan in Kuala Selangor district. Assalamualaikum, Cik Budi.
Salam.
Eddie lah saya panggil macam biasa
panggil Eddie pun boleh.
Panggil Eddie macam biasa
Macam biasa.
Okey Eddie. Saya lupa tadi, Eddie punya post dalam Inspirasi Kawa sebagai presiden ke?
Penyelaras Inspirasi Kawa. Jadi bersama-sama dengan sahabat Eddie, Nur Asia, Abdul Kadir dan juga Afan Nasaruddin. Nanti Eddie explain berkaitan dengan Inspirasi Kawa lebih detail lah.
Okay, alright, boleh. So kita nak dengar sikit Eddie, apa Eddie mungkin mewakili komuniti yang muda dekat Kuala Selangor kan. Jadi membesar selama ni di Kampung Kuantan, dikelilingi oleh attraction. Ada satu attraction, saya tak nak bagi spoil, bagi punchline awal sangat tu Eddie punya punchline. So macam mana kebergantungan komuniti ni kepada sumber hutan bakau di sekeliling Kampung Kuantan memberi income, memberi pendapatan kepada komuniti. Okay, so Eddie ada presentation hari ni kan?
Eddie nanti dijelaskan dalam presentation.
Alright.
Lebih
so
detail.
saya serahkan kepada Eddie.
Okey, Doktor. Terima kasih, Doktor. Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera kepada tuan-tuan dan puan-puan. Sebelum tu saya ingin berkongsi sikit berkaitan dengan Inspirasi Kawa. So, Inspirasi Kawa ni merupakan kelab dan social enterprise alam sekitar untuk belia di Mukim Pasangan, Kuala Selangor. Ditubuhkan pada 2013. Kelab Inspirasi Kawa ni memfokuskan berkaitan dengan Sungai Selangor, memfokuskan berkaitan dengan bakau dan juga klik-klik. Di mana kita bukan sekadar melihat, mungkin kita melakukan tindakan sesuatu terhadap untuk penjagaan Sungai Selangor dan bakau khususnya. So dahulu Inspirasi Kawa ni dikenali sebagai kelab alam kawa. Inspirasi bermaksud sesuatu yang menggerakkan hati untuk melakukan sesuatu, dan kawa itu adalah bermaksud dari segi bahasa Jepun bermakna sungai. Kenapa kita pilih Jepun? Kalau kita lihat negara Jepun ni negara yang maju, walaupun ada berlakunya tsunami ataupun banjir, negara dia cepat recovery, apa-apa tindakan yang untuk pemulihan dia cepat. So kita jadikan Jepun ni sebagai kita punya idola lah untuk Inspirasi Kawa. Okay, next. Next. Ini ahli-ahli untuk Inspirasi Kawa yang kebanyakannya terdiri anak-anak muda di Kampung Kuantan yang berusia daripada 7 tahun hingga sekolah menengah. Memang kita fokus pada generasi muda ni. Kenapa? Yang saya lihat untuk beberapa tahun ni, generasi muda kerap terpinggir. Kebanyakannya kelab ataupun NGO tertumpu pada golongan belia, tak memfokuskan kepada adik-adik kecil. Kita selalu terapkan diri kita nak alam sekitar ni untuk generasi muda, tapi kita dalam masa yang sama kita tidak pun bertindak untuk mengajar dan memberi ruang kepada adik-adik muda. So inspirasi kawan ni memang fokus kepada adik-adik muda. So next kita di sebalik inspirasi kawan. Di sebalik inspirasi kawan tadi kalau dilihat tadi ada daripada pensyarah daripada Universiti Malaya iaitu Dr. Zida Fatimah, Pak Ngarazak. Pak Ngarazak merupakan komuniti di Kampung Kuantan, bekas ranger di Kuala Selangor Nature Park. So kita gunakan pengalaman Pak Ngarazak ni. Pak Ngarazak ni expert berkaitan dengan bakau. So kita belajar dengan beliau. Dan Cikgu Yusof ni yang merupakan ketua kampung di Kampung Kuantan. So apa-apa kerja ataupun apa-apa gerak kerja yang kita lakukan, kita akan maklum kepada ketua kampung. Dan pengasasnya adalah sahabat saya Afan Nasruddin dan juga Nurasia Abdul Kadir dan juga saya lah. So next. Okay. Sungai Selangor ni Sungai Selangor panjangnya kalau diikutkan daripada Fraser Hill membawa ke Kuala Selangor, Muara Kuala Selangor sepanjang 197 km. Di bahagian upstream kebiasaannya merupakan muka sauk ataupun water intake kegunaan rakyat Selangor. Tapi sebenarnya di Kampung Kuantan, di hilir, di bahagian hilir, sebenarnya masih terdapat lagi kepentingan untuk komuniti untuk menjana ekonomi, khususnya adalah sebut saja nama Kampung Kuantan, popular dengan klik-klik. Seluruh dunia akan kenal Kampung Kuantan disebabkan klik-klik. Dan di bahagian downstream juga merupakan hutan antara darat dan laut, iaitu hutan paya laut ataupun hutan bakau. Di mana hutan paya bakau ni merupakan banyak manfaat hutan paya bakau ni, sama ada rantaian makanan, penapis air, penyerap karbon, yang itu sedia maklum. Tetapi sama juga di Kampung Kuantan ni merupakan tempat akuatik, sumber ikan, udang galah, di mana kepentingan kepada nelayan sungai. Dan juga yang kalau dilihat kat sini ada silver monkey, di mana spesies yang ini memang atau lotong memang terdapat di Kuala Selangor, di mana hutan paya bakau tu sangat penting untuk rantaian makanannya. Okey. Kepentingan Sungai Selangor. 60% penyumbang sumber bekalan air di Lembah Kelang, iaitu di Kuala Lumpur dan Selangor. Ini sangat-sangat penting. Ramai yang tidak tahu, walaupun even komuniti di Kampung Kuantan pun tak tahu. Kebanyakan kita kalau ditanya mana datang air kita guna, dia kata ramai yang cakap daripada paip rumah. Tapi so bila kita ada wujudkan inspirasi kawan ni, kita train komuniti yang lebih fakta, yang lebih tepat. Puncak air adalah di Sungai Selangor. Sungai Selangor juga merupakan nadi utama kepada komuniti untuk meningkatkan sosioekonomi. Seperti di lampiran gambar yang ini, hutan paya bakau itu sangat penting dalam industri kraft tangan. Contohnya pembuatan atap nipah, penggunaan batang-batang nibung untuk wakaf gazebo, dan juga kalau ikutkan buah berembang yang spesies Sonaratia cassularis tu, buah tu kalau komuniti mungkin pesangan ni dia buat ulam ataupun buat sambal. So ramai orang luar mungkin tak tahu komuniti kat sini buat ulam dan dijadikan sambal. So Sungai Selangor ni penting juga sebagai hubungan. Kalau dulu Sungai Selangor ni menghubungkan antara kampung ke kampung. Tapi buat masa sekarang ni masih guna juga sebagai hubungan, iaitu daripada serata dunia. Sebab apa? Sebab ekopelancongan klip ni menghubungkan bukan sekadar pelancong dan menghubungkan juga pengkaji-pengkaji daripada seluruh dunia berkaitan dengan bakau dan klip. Okey. Okey. Yang ni lihatlah sungai kita. Yang ini diambil waktu tahun tak silap saya 2014. Keadaan dia sangat-sangat teruk. Saya juga pun dayung sampan ke Kelip Kampung Tan. Pengalaman saya apabila membawa pelancong daripada luar, kita sering mengajak pelancong untuk melihat keindahan ke Kelip, tapi dalam masa yang sama kita terlupa yang sungai kita tu sangat-sangat kotor dengan terutamanya sampah lah. Kalau dilihat kat sini ada kebanyakannya sampah yang jenis plastik, polystyrene yang tidak boleh diketas semula. Okay. Okay, kita ada ekspresi kawal ada beberapa program. So yang ini program Sayangi Sungai Selangor. Program Sayangi Sungai Selangor ni salah satunya adalah aktiviti pembersihan sungai. Boleh dikatakan setiap bulan kita melakukan aktiviti ini bersama dengan komuniti, bersama dengan NGO lain, bersama dengan syarikat korporat. Pada mulanya aktiviti ni dilakukan saya daripada tahun 2015. Saya berseorangan, tapi lama kelamaan bila dah kita upload dalam social media, alhamdulillah kerjasama daripada semua pihak dan hasilnya sangat memberangsangkan hasil kutipan yang keadaannya sampah masih ada tapi keadaannya lebih baik daripada yang gambar sebelum ni 2014. Okay.
Jadi ada 5 minit lagi ya.
Okey, 5 minit lagi. Okey. So sampah macam-macam kita ada jumpa sikit lah, body part kereta, washing machine, macam-macam. So, next. Okey. Sampah yang kebiasaannya kita kutip ni, kita akan kumpulkan, kita akan asingkan sama ada sampah yang boleh diketas semula atau sampah yang tidak boleh diketas semula. So kita akan timbang dan kita rekodkan data untuk reference kepada pihak berwajib seperti Lembaga Ruas Selangor, ada daerah Kota Selangor. Okay, next. Okay, ini jumlah kutipan sampah. Pernah direkodkan tahun lepas bersama Yayasan Atalega. Dalam masa 2 jam kita mampu kutip lebih kurang 1.5 kg, 1.5 tan kg. Iaitu melibatkan 80 orang. Okay. So 2019 daripada Januari hingga Disember kita mampu kutip menghampiri 10 tan metrik. Kalau diikutkan setiap tahun ke tahun hingga 2019, kutipan sampah tu lebih meningkat sebab pelibatan daripada komuniti, pelibatan daripada NGO, pelibatan daripada universiti. So bila kita bekerjasama, pelibatan semua pihak, manpower yang lebih ramai, so kutipan sampah tu lebih banyak. Okay, next. Okay. Seperti saya cakap tadi, sampah yang diasingkan yang boleh diketas semula kita akan bagi kepada Abang Udin. Abang Udin ni yang berbaju biru tu merupakan OKU. Dia setiap petang mengayuh basikal, sambil mengayuh basikal tu akan kutip sampah yang boleh diketas semula. So sebahagiannya kita akan bagi kepada Abang Udin untuk duit pocketnya. Sebahagian lain kalau terlalu banyak, kita akan bagi kontraktor Majlis Daerah Kota Selangor untuk uruskan hantar ke tempat yang sepatutnya lah. Okay. Okay. Yang ini penanaman semula riparian, pokok yang kita tanam dekat nursery, kita semai pokok, pokok Cineraria cassularis, pokok nipah dan pokok, kadang-kadang kita tanam juga pokok sagu. Tapi yang saya khusus sekarang ni adalah pokok nipah dan pokok berembang. Okay. So pokok berembang ni sebenarnya sumber makanan kepada kelip-kelip dewasa, dan pokok nipah dan sagu ni adalah merupakan habitat untuk larva kelip-kelip, di mana larva kelip-kelip ni dia akan makan siput Tropics carinata. Siput tu ada terdapat dekat kawasan pokok nipah dan sagu. Sebab itu kita buat lakukan penyemaian pokok dan penanaman pokok di lapangan. So ini kerjasama daripada luas, Tenaga Nasional Berhad, Yayasan Atalega. So next. Okay. Yang terbaru adalah pendidikan berasaskan tempat, iaitu sains rakyat. Sebelum ni kita buat penanaman semula, kita buat river cleanup, tapi yang ini lebih spesifik, lebih detail, lebih saintifik, di mana kita kerjasama dengan Newton Engku Omar Fund dan juga kerjasama dengan Universiti Malaya dan Kadir Universiti. Kita sekarang ni bukan sekadar melihat dan melakukan sesuatu, tapi kita nak lebih terperinci. So, yang ini kita ada buat pemonitoran kualiti air, di mana nak komuniti tahu sendiri keadaan. Kalau sebelum ni kita tahu secara fizikal, secara pandangan mata, tapi tak detail. So, ini pelengkapnya. So, kita memfokuskan sains rakyat. Sekarang ni bukan kepada kerjasama dengan komuniti setempat saja. Sekarang ni Edi dan Afan Nasruddin memfokuskan di sepanjang hilir Sungai Selangor, melibatkan komuniti-komuniti sampai ke muara Sungai Selangor. Okay?
Okay, dia ada seminit lagi.
Okay, next. Okay, yang ini yang terakhir. Setelah beberapa tahun, ekspresi kawah kalau dulu bersorangan, sekarang ni dah ada kerjasama dengan badan kerajaan seperti FRIM, luas, mati daerah, Jabatan Perikanan Malaysia. Jabatan Perikanan Malaysia tahun lepas kita buat pelepasan ikan benih baung dan udang galah. So hasilnya tahun ni udang galah banyak, ikan baung pun besar-besar. So ini ekspresi kawah jadi orang tengah lah antara badan kerajaan, Universiti, UKM, Unicel dan juga komuniti setempat, NGO dan korporat. Sekarang ni yang fokus di Sungai Selangor, di hilir Sungai Selangor adalah Yayasan Atalega sebagai founder kepada ekspresi kawah. Okay. Okay, secara tidak langsung impak kepada komuniti adalah dari segi knowledge, lebih saintifik, hubungan antara, maksudnya hubungan tadi antara badan kerajaan, NGO, korporat dan komuniti, dan juga secara tak langsung bila ada pemeliharaan meningkatkan sosioekonomi setempat. So, dekat itu saja. Sebelum itu saya ingin share pada tuan-tuan dan puan video berkaitan dengan apa yang dilakukan di Sungai Selangor, iaitu replanting mangrove.
Saya yakin bahawa pihak pengurusan
Yeah.
Ni tak buat kerja. Ini kita ada program tanam berembang KMB bersama Angkatan Penayung, Kongres Inspirasi Kawah. Tarikh hari ini adalah 18 November 2018. Okey. Jadi hari ini memang seronok. Terima kasih TMB. Terima kasih TMB. Bye.
Okey, terima kasih banyak Saudara Eddie. Jadi kita dengan jelas lah Eddie menunjukkan bahawa walaupun kebergantungan masyarakat kepada pelancongan berasaskan sumber semula jadi macam hutan bakau dan klip-klip, tapi untuk menjalankan untuk memelihara, untuk meneruskan kelangsungan industri pelancongan tu bukan kerja mudah lah. Maknanya kena melibatkan penglibatan komuniti, penglibatan local authority, pihak berkuasa tempatan, kerajaan negeri, dan juga macam dengan jelas tadi Eddie menceritakan macam mana impact daripada hulu sungai, apa aktiviti yang apa saja aktiviti yang berlaku di atas sana yang menerima impactnya adalah habitat kelip-kelip tu, habitat hutan bakau tu, dan juga komuniti di kawasan hilir kan. Jadi macam samalah macam macam Pak Abu dengan Cik Sabri cerita tadi, impact dekat sana yang kena membersihkannya Eddie dan rakan-rakan dekat Kampung Kuantan, dekat Kuala Selangor kan. Jadi kena sama-samalah, maknanya saya apa yang boleh saya rangkumkan daripada apa yang perkongsian Eddie tadi, maknanya untuk kalau kita lihat daripada skala negeri untuk Kerajaan Negeri Selangor, mungkin kena mengambil kira apa saja kalau kita nak majukan tourism income untuk masyarakat Kuala Selangor dan juga negeri Selangor, bukan saja hanya memfokus di situ tapi juga aktiviti di sepanjang 100 km Sungai Selangor tadi kan. Sepanjang Sungai Selangor. Jadi itu semua kena diambil kira. Sebab impact dia selama ni komuniti di Kuala Selangor mungkin bergantung kepada sebelum tu mungkin perikanan dan beralih kepada tourism kan, hasil ekoturism berasaskan kepada kelip-kelip, dan juga saya tangkap satu aspek daripada pembentangan Eddie tadi, aktiviti kemasyarakatan atau aktiviti konservasi itu sendiri boleh jadi satu tarikan pelancongan. Jadi maknanya komuniti ataupun masyarakat di luar yang mungkin jauh sikit daripada garis pantai datang sebagai pelawat, sebagai turis, tapi membantu dalam aktiviti konservasi kan. Jadi saya rasa itu
mungkin
satu,
boleh saya selitkan sikit. Sekarang ni trend pelancong yang Eddie pun juga pemandu pelancong dan juga host community Selangor. Trend market sekarang ni pelancong bukan nak melihat saja. Ya, sekarang ni pelancong dia nak experience apa yang komuniti buat, itu yang dia nak lakukan. That's why Eddie selitkan aktiviti konservasi ni dalam Firefly punya part. At least bukan setakat melihat, mungkin nak rasa, nak kena pupuk, apa dia makan, macam mana tanam dia, itu yang kita terapkan lah.
Okey, terima kasih banyak.
Alhamdulillah ada dapat feedback yang positif daripada Tourism Selangor dan juga agensi kerajaan yang lain.
Good, dan juga experiential learning lah, experiential tourism saya rasa sebab super juga dengan beberapa komuniti kita dengar macam tadilah, macam cik sekali lagi yang Langkawi pun, maknanya pelancong datang untuk experience tangkap ikan itu pun satu tarikan kan. Jadi mungkin ada kaedah lah untuk Eddie dan rakan-rakan komuniti, maknanya kita macam mana kita packagekan perkara ni kan untuk pelancong enjoy, dan juga macam mana dia memberikan kelebihan ataupun dari segi ekonomi juga kepada komuniti ya. Jadi saya juga kena sentuh yang terakhir tadi sebelum video tu tadi, Eddie tunjukkan macam mana komuniti terimpact ataupun semua masyarakat, semua stakeholder lah yang terlibat dalam konservasi hutan bakau ni, macam mana mereka terlibat dan juga macam mana mereka boleh melibatkan diri dalam pemeliharaan hutan bakau dan membantu komuniti jugalah akhirnya. Jadi saya ucapkan terima kasih banyak Eddie atas masa Eddie dan juga kerjasama Eddie untuk sudi bersama-sama kami pada hari ini, dan juga saya ucapkan selamat maju jaya lah kepada Eddie, Inspirasi Kawah, komuniti Kampung Kuantan ya. So all the best. Selamat maju jaya. Assalamualaikum.
Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. So our friend Eddie just now has highlighted on how it is not easy actually to operate tourism activity or nature tourism. As we all know, mangrove as a home or habitat for fireflies actually depend on the health of rivers. So whatever happens from upstream will have impact downstream. Whatever pollution being exposed in the runoff from upstream would have impact on the downstream habitat, which are mangroves and other coastal wetlands. Yeah? And it is important to get all stakeholders to work together, and the focus shouldn't be only on the habitat per se, but throughout the watershed area and the river systems. So, and then another point that Eddie highlighted just now is not just attracting tourists to view mangroves and fireflies in the habitat, but it is to promote experiential tourism or experiential learning for tourists, meaning they come and join and participate in conservation work. So there are branches of other opportunities to increase tourism. So we thank all three representatives from our communities that has highlighted the importance of mangroves as for fisheries and for local products as well as for tourism. So to end the session today, we have the climax of the event, the ultimate session, and we have a very dear person, very close to me, who I reckon is one of the key champion of biodiversity conservation and nature conservation in Malaysia. And thank you. And I think we have Tan Sri Salih Muhammad Noor, academician Tan Sri Salih Muhammad Noor, to share with us his lifelong experience on nature conservation in Malaysia, in particular on mangrove conservation. He's very dear to me as I have with me Tan Sri. Hello, how are you? Assalamualaikum, Tan Sri.
Waalaikumsalam.
Okay,
apa khabar?
Baik. And you know what? I look out for my archive when I found this paper from 1988. You wrote this with Dr. Chan Hang Tak while you were in Flint.
Oh, yeah.
And it is still a key reference for many of us, researchers in Malaysia, and I'm pretty sure the government agencies also are still using it as a key reference. As I mentioned earlier, Tan Sri Saleh is very dear to me because some of his work before has been a key reference to many of us younger scientists, younger generation of mangrove scientists in particular. And as he was the chair for a UNDP project in the 80s, which is called the National Mangrove Committee, which was formed in many Southeast Asia and tropical countries, and as well as some key publications like I've mentioned, like I've showed you earlier. And briefly, I mean, to read his CV is super long, so I will highlight some key points. Tan Sri, if you're okay with this.
Tak perlu pun.
Tan Sri Saleh spent most of his professional life in advocating and protecting nature and nature resources in Malaysia as the DG of Forest Research Institute of Malaysia, as well as on his personal capacity as the former president of Malaysian Nature Society for 30 years. Yeah, Tan Sri Saleh was involved with numerous international organizations also. I know one of them, our APA-FREE, in his effort to work towards addressing and rising environmental concerns. Yeah. He is also the recipient of the Merdeka Award in the year 2016. Congratulations, Tan Sri, under Environment category. And currently he is the Senior Fellow of the Academy of Sciences Malaysia. So it's good to have one of the academician of the Academy to summarize basically, Tan Sri, how you experience maybe on looking at the goodness or the decline in mangrove conservation, or the good effort that we've done all this while to protect our mangroves. And another one is your vision or perhaps your view, or the thing that you expect to see in the near future. Why I ask this question is because you were there, thank you very much, to actually launch the small network that we created among all Malaysian mangrove scientists, which is called My Mangrove, the Malaysian Mangrove Research Alliance and Network, a collaboration in between all researchers and scientists in Malaysia and outside Malaysia who has interest on Malaysia from diverse background. And you were there to motivate all of us, to inspire all of us to work together for the better management of mangrove. So please, we would like to hear from you, Tan Sri.
Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Dr. Adri, saya, sahabat saya, dan tahniah kepada ASM dan semua rakan-rakan. Saya ada slide presentation tapi memandangkan masa tak tahu boleh tidak. Nampak tak?
We apologize for the time, Tan Sri, sorry.
Ya, mungkin ni. Nampak tak slide presentation saya? Ya.
Can you please share screen?
Ini perkara ni semua tadi sebagai daripada tsunami, daripada storm dan sebagainya. Saya anggap hutan perairan laut ni mangrove sebagai satu ekosistem yang sangat penting. Dan apa yang disebut tadi hasil daripada hutan perairan laut ni dah dikenali lama, dan saya tertarik atas usaha-usaha yang telah dilaksanakan oleh komuniti-komuniti yang terlibat dalam mengguna sumber-sumber hutan perairan laut, mangrove, untuk berbagai perkara, terutama sekali di komuniti di Perlis dan di Kuala Selangor. Saya ucapan tahniah kepada mereka semua. Namun saya ingin menekankan beberapa perkara, iaitu yang pertamanya soal memelihara hutan perairan laut supaya ia kekal sedia ada untuk masa yang akan datang. Seperti mana yang telah ditekankan oleh Dr. Frise dan Dr. Rahmat Shah, dan soal memeliharanya untuk bukan hanya perlindungan tetapi kegunaan juga. iaitu conservation and utilization. Dan saya harap perkara ini akan diberi tekanan untuk masa-masa akan datang melalui aktiviti-aktiviti dan juga dikekalkan melalui undang-undang, iaitu undang-undang untuk conservation, mengekalkan kawasan-kawasan yang tiada. Saya tertarik statistik yang telah disebut tadi bahawa kehilangan kawasan paya gambut kita di Malaysia, bukan paya gambut, paya laut kita di Malaysia sangat berkurangan, iaitu kurang pada 3.3%. And this is very good. Dan Dr. Adri ada sebut tadi My Mangrove sebagai satu network, dan pada asalnya kita telah mulakan wujudkan NetMancom dan melalui UNESCO project pada tahun 80-an lagi. Satu lagi perkara yang saya sangat tertarik dan saya cukupkan tanah pada masyarakat-masyarakat yang terlibat daripada Langkawi, di Kelang dan di Kuala Selangor, atas penglibatan orang ramai, masyarakat-masyarakat dalam penggunaan hutan bakau. Saya pun kurang pasti banyak perkara yang boleh dihasilkan, terutama sekali makanan-makanan. Dan ini harus diperkembangkan dan dimajukan supaya orang ramai, masyarakat lebih faham, lebih tahu atas kegunaan dan hasil yang didapati, diperoleh daripada hutan bakau di negara kita. Ya. Satu perkara yang saya sebut tadi ialah sebagai carbon sink, memandangkan perubahan iklim di dunia, climate change, paya laut, mangrove ecosystem memainkan peranan yang sangat tinggi dalam aspek carbon sink. Dan ini terlibat dengan conservation of mangrove forest, iaitu pemeliharaan. Dan yang terakhir sekali soal ekoturism dan penglibatan masyarakat, bukan hanya dalam membawa pelancong-pelancong dari dalam dan luar negara, dan juga penglibatan mereka seperti mana yang disebut oleh apa ni tadi, Pak Abu, Cik Haji Sabri, Puan Siti Hajah, Cik Alias, sangat pada hemat saya menarik dan sangat menggalakkan supaya ianya akan menuju terhadap memelihara dan mengekalkan pemeliharaan alam sekitar. Saya terlibat secara indirect dalam menubuhkan NetMancom terdahulu untuk menggalakkan bukan hanya penyelidikan tetapi kesedaran rakyat atas pentingnya hutan paya laut, dan untuk menggalakkan pendidikan khususnya di peringkat anak-anak muda bahawa hutan paya laut ni sangat penting sebagai satu ekosistem di negara kita khususnya dan di dunia amnya. Dan saya harap ia akan dikekalkan dan aktiviti-aktiviti tertentu diambil, dibuat, dilaksanakan untuk menggalakkan penggunaan hutan paya laut di kalangan anak-anak sekolah kita. Oleh sebab apa? Sebab mereka kadang-kadang takut nampak hutan paya laut dengan lumpurnya, dengan airnya, dengan buayanya. Anak-anak kita takut masuk dalam hutan paya laut ni. Namun begitu, banyak faedah-faedah yang harus boleh kita peroleh. Sebagai contoh, di Malaysian Society Persatuan Pencinta Alam di Kertih, ada aktiviti di pusat pendidikan kita di MNS di Kertih, ada penglibatan masyarakat untuk menanam hutan bayi laut di situ, dan juga penglibatan budak-budak sekolah sebagai contoh ya. Dan satu aspek yang telah disentuh ialah kepentingan klip-klip, dan klip-klip di Kuala Selangor ini telah dikenal pasti dah lama pada asalnya oleh Persatuan Pencinta Alam, tetapi oleh kerana pembangunan yang kurang lestari, klip-klip ini sangat berkurangan bagi ketika ini. Dan ekosistem klip-klip ini sangat unik ya. Berhubungan dengan pokok berembang dan siput, dan aspek-aspek ini harus dikaji dengan teliti supaya dalam menggalakkan tourism, pelancongan, kita faham apa yang saya sebut software ecotourism, iaitu ilmu di belakang tourism itu. Dan di sinilah penglibatan para penyelidik di universiti-universiti dalam memelihara dan memahami apanya kaedah dan fundamental aspek yang ada dalam hutan mangrove, hutan bayi laut ni. Soalan pertama, sebagai contoh ya, kenapa hutan bakau dan sebagainya boleh tumbuh dalam keadaan air yang masin? Kenapa jika kita tanam pokok meranti situ, boleh dia hidup tidak? Apa sifat-sifat dan ciri-ciri pokok-pokok ini yang membolehkan mereka hidup subur dalam keadaan air yang masin, air laut? Sebaliknya, jika kita bawa pokok-pokok bakau dan banyak jenis-jenis lain sampai laut ke darat, boleh mereka hidup tidak? Dan bolehkah mereka hidup dan subur dalam keadaan darat? So aspek-aspek ini harus dikaji supaya kita lebih faham the physiology pokok-pokok tersebut. Dan banyak-banyak aspek lagi Dr. Adri, dan saya tak ingin mengambil masa yang panjang. Namun saya ingin mengakhiri ucapan saya dengan mengucapkan setinggi tahniah bersama para penceramah tadi. Sangat-sangat tertarik dengan penglibatan masyarakat-masyarakat, dan kami harap mungkin selepas COVID ini kita dapat bertemu muka dalam satu perjumpaan, face-to-face meeting, supaya kita berkenalan dengan saudara-saudara, makcik, kakak-kakak, makcik-makcik ya, maaf, adik-adik, kakak di kampung-kampung yang telah terlibat dengan pemeliharaan dan penggunaan bayi laut, bahan-bahan bayi laut ini. Saya sangat-sangat mengucapkan tahniah kepada mereka, dan semoga Allah memelihara mereka dan selamat berjaya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much Tan Sri. And saya aminkan, kita aminkan doa tu tadi. Inilah satu perkara yang saya kagum dengan Tan Sri. Sifat ingin tahu, sifat belajar, dan sifat ingin suka kepada ilmu-ilmu baru. Jadi terima kasih banyak atas recap yang Tan Sri bagi tadi, dan juga beberapa key point nasihat yang pada saya sangat penting untuk diambil oleh Academy Science, dan juga kita semualah masyarakat sains, community scientific, komuniti yang tinggal di kawasan hutan bakau itu sendiri, dan juga pentadbir atau pengurus sumber dan juga penglibatan daripada corporate dan juga komuniti ya. Tan Sri Tan Sri highlight tadi kepentingan untuk kenapa kita kena conserve hutan bakau, kenapa pentingnya pemeliharaan hutan bakau adalah satu untuk meneruskan penyelidikan baru ya. Topik macam Tan Sri sebut tadi, fisiologi dan morfologi hutan bakau, itu pun masih banyak yang perlu kita explore ya. Kerentanan spesies, for example, diversity species. Kita juga tahu taksonomi study kepada mangrove juga masih belum selesai, sebab mereka masih bukan dianggap sebagai satu taxonomic group kan. Jadi banyak debate lah, continuous debate tentang karakteristik hutan bakau. Yang kedua juga, pemeliharaan ini membawa kepada kesedaran ya, macam mana kita nak meningkatkan ilmu. Ini juga penlibatan universiti, pendidikan akademik ya, dan juga local community ya, untuk sama-sama berkongsi traditional knowledge dan juga ilmu pengetahuan untuk pembangunan pendidikan dan juga awareness lah. Dan juga Tan Sri juga highlight community involvement ya. Jadi kita sebagai pentadbir sumber asli mesti juga melibatkan komuniti ya, dalam apa saja keputusan yang dibuat, dan juga libatkan komuniti dalam pembangunan sumber seperti ekoturism. Dan saya suka bila Tan Sri highlight tentang ekoturism ini tally dengan hasrat Kementerian Tenaga dan Sumber Asli yang baru. Mereka kementerian dimaklumkan pada hari Ahad itu kita celebrate International Day peringkat kebangsaan di Matang, di mana yang berhormat menteri masa tu dia dengan tegas lah akan berusaha untuk meningkatkan income pendapatan masyarakat ya, pembangunan luar bandar melalui pembangunan ekoturism. Tak kira lah nature tourism dari aspek biodiversity, geology, community, products, pembangunan boardwalk yang pembangunan minimum, pembangunan lestari sebagai kaedah untuk pembangunan komuniti. Jadi terima kasih banyak Tan Sri. Kita minta maaf sebab delay tadi, janjinya jumpa Tan Sri 12.30 tapi kita jumpa dekat pukul 1 dah tadi, 12 suku ke 25 macam tu. Sorry to delay your lunch time.
I forgot. No problem. I forgot to recognize my dear friend Dr. Rahimah Shah tadi. Tahniah kepada dia.
Ya. Okey, kita kan mungkin dia tengah masih menonton ni. Jadi kita nak ucapkan terima kasih Tan Sri punya cadangan kita akan terima. Kita harap coronavirus COVID-19 ni akan kita bertemu dengan vaksinnya secepat mungkin, dan PKP dan MCO ni akan tamat segera, dan kita ambil saranan daripada Tan Sri, kita akan mungkin teruskan aktiviti-aktiviti saintifik, aktiviti-aktiviti bersama komuniti dengan lebih kerap lah lepas tu ya. Dan insyaAllah kita akan pertemukanlah Tan Sri dengan komuniti-komuniti yang kita kenalkan tadi dalam masa terdekat ni nanti. Okay, jadi thank you very much again Tan Sri for your time and for your knowledge sharing.
Terima kasih. Dan best wishes, tahniah sekali lagi.
Terima kasih. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And your effort.
Assalamualaikum.
Bye-bye. Assalamualaikum. Alright, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That is pretty much the end of our session. So some very key points that I need to highlight coming up from suggestions and the summary by Tan Sri, Dr. Salih Muhammad Noor just now. So it is important for us to protect and conserve mangrove, basically to enhance the opportunity for research and scientific exploration in mangrove. We realize that there are so many aspects on taxonomy, on physiology, on morphology, study of mangrove that needs to be explored, and then how academia and scientific community could contribute for awareness and knowledge and advancement, enhancement for the benefit of all communities in the world. Because even with his long experience, Tan Sri, he still learn new things, and he was so excited just now to learn like new products coming from local communities, like the one presented by Puan Siti Hajar and Encik Elias from Penang, and some of the impacts of development on the habitat, which in the end impact the income for community. And of course, conservation also is important for to involve community in any kind of development. Software development, he mentioned, which one of the best means to carry this out is by promoting nature tourism or ecotourism. This tallies with the wish of our new minister, the Ministry of Energy and Nature Resources. The direction is to promote nature tourism. In essence, it's nature tourism, but it can be on different habitats and ecosystem. It can be on biodiversity, geological diversity, and also products from communities that can be promoted. Nature tourism also could involve linkages with cultural development, which is the key component in any habitats or ecosystems. So with that, I take this opportunity again to thank the organisers, the Mahathir Science Award Foundation and the Academy of Sciences Malaysia for having me and having all of us here. And we, on behalf of the organisers, I would like to thank all of you for your participation in this webinar, and as well as your commitment and your interest in mangrove conservation anywhere you are. So again, happy International Day for the conservation of the mangrove ecosystems. Stay safe wherever you are, and we hope to catch up with you soon. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of ASM and MSAF, I would like to thank the viewers for their participation in the celebration of the International Day for the Conservation of the Mangrove Ecosystem. I hope we would continue to support the development in mangrove and nourish more talents to venture into this field. For those interested in knowing and participating in MSAF's upcoming programs, you can visit our website at msafoundation.org or follow the Mahathir Science Award Foundation social media platform. And for those interested in knowing and participating in ASM's upcoming programs, you can visit our social media platform. Hope to see you again in upcoming MSAF and ASM engagement programs. Thank you.